understand that's because of the headset, the noise cancellation.
Okay. Yeah, man. I'm glad we could connect today, Pharaoh, man. How you do? Or just today, your time is early day. My time, I guess, technically. How are you doing over there?
Here, I'm just about to ask you the same thing because I know you were traveling. So we both were traveling. So how did it go?
Everything, I made my connection smoothly, so everything was pretty smooth. Just like a quick little trip. I can't, I didn't have any problems really. So, it was a good time. I'm glad I was able to get back and charge up a little bit so we could do this. I had some things I wanted to ask you, and yeah. And for everybody listening on Instagram, you guys should come over to Spaces. It'll be better quality. So, I guess as far as like what I wanted to get into today, I really wanted to talk about the creative process in Genesis. I know it's like I guess a kind of the theme, I guess, in some respects today. I think Passover, the last day of Passover is today, and Orthodox Easter and Catholic Easter. So and Protestant Easter, no, and Protestant Easter too. I think it's all today. But
exactly.
Yeah. So I'm kind of to stick kind of with the theme in some ways. I wanted to ask about like the creation process as as Genesis details, because I was reading about like the different correlations between the 7 periods or 7 days of creation in Genesis and the 7 periods of the periodic table. And I just wanted to ask you, I guess, to get some further insight on that, because I think it from what I'm looking at, it's like it all correlates. Like you have 7 periods in the periodic table, 7 yawms or 7 periods in creation in Genesis, and I've seen like different. I've seen some people say that there's 7 families in the periodic table as well. I've seen different reports of different numbers of families, but I've seen like 7 families being alkali metals, alkali earth metals, post-transition metals, metalloids, halogens, noble metals, and noble gases. So I was wondering, like, man, is this like indicative of like the genetic breakdown as well? Because we have like in the beginning, it's like in Genesis, it's like there's 2 people, and then there's in a sense it's kind of like 2 elements where you got hydrogen and helium, and then the flood happens, and then you got 8 people come out the ark, and it's like 8 elements in the second period, and then Jacob has 4 wives, 12 sons, 1 daughter, and it's 18 people and 18 elements in the third period, and so on and so forth. So I was just wondering if this is what we're going through, like, are we experiencing the periodic table, like physically and metaphysically, like I guess, and when we read the Bible, it's kind of like allegorically.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned, well, yeah, allegory, of course, but again, when you start transliterating and turning things into various languages, there's going to be some input from the transcriber and from the scribe. But these are part of someone else's story put together to become a conglomerate or a hodgepodge of stories within events and situations. So each situation led to a revelation based on experience as told to or told by. And typically told by is rare, but told to seems to be quite the norm, or the scale of things when it comes to how we receive or these ancient writings were rendered. They're rendered as a result of passed down information. And in terms of elements, then most would say, oh, carbon's the oldest. Okay, carbon is old or older, but it's not it is old. It's older than sulfur, for example. But hydrogen and helium, as you mentioned, I think that are the actual, according to so-called science, the oldest. But they were basically, according to the theorists of universal or galactic manifestation of matter, body, celestial bodies, aka so-called Big Bang, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, because I was reading as well about hydrogen. Is that like when it's in a high pressurized state, that it appear like or a metallic state, that it appears black. And I was wondering, like, if hydrogen being the most abundant element in the universe supposedly, does that mean that when we look out at the blackness of space, are we looking out at hydrogen just like in a high pressured state? Oh, did I lose you? Man, I lose you, Pharaoh? Damn.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, I hear you now.
Okay, I have to keep that in mind. The screen, that's why the phone heats up. I keep it away from you just in case something wants to go boom. But it heats up, and I have to keep the screen on. Otherwise, the mic mutes automatically. I'll see if there's a way around that for future reference. Like right now, it's going into screen saving mode. I'll just keep an eye on that. As I was saying, that the so-called darkness or so-called blackness of space, the abyss of so-called space, and the quasi-abyss of what we see beneath us, because even though the arrogance of so-called modern hegemony claims to know that there is a depth to the ocean, they also have to admit they don't know the depth, the deepest reaches. So they have discovered, they claim to have discovered trenches around the various oceans, and say that those are the closest humanity has come to not necessarily seeing depth, true depth or abyss, but recognizing that this could be an abyss. They put a bottom to one of the alleged deepest trenches. But if that's the case, then you wouldn't call that an abyss, or they're lying about knowing the depth of it. But above, supposedly above, if above is below, according to the scale of principles, that above is below, then we're really not looking up, we're not really looking down, we're looking outward or inward. And the abyss of it all would have to have some form of matter to it. It obviously, for us to see it, are you seeing into nothing? And so there's no such thing as no thing. So you're seeing into something. What is that something? It would have to contain one of the so-called known elements, or perhaps an unknown element, or the beginnings of one of the elements that are said, maybe not known. I probably use that word loosely. I would use that word loosely, actually. Known meaning they know certain things about, for example, hydrogen, but not everything. So therefore they don't know it per se. So we look into this abyss.
Damn, you probably gotta hit your screen again. I don't know if you pull the top down, maybe to keep it open. The top tab, maybe if you slide it down.
I see what you're saying. Okay, maybe that will help. All right. We'll see if that works. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you perfect.
Okay. As I was saying that, I think it's one of those so-called philosophers, Nietzsche, I think, that, looking into the abyss and it stares back. Well, that is in itself a code. You look into something, and in order for it to look back, it would have to have matter. Hydrogen is a form of matter. if it's the oldest form, then that which exists around us, in us, would more than likely have to be a combination of things. So when they talk about angelic realms and the assistance with so-called creation coming together and then separating, well, are we not referring to elements?
Yeah. And when looking at the creation story, like in the first yom or in the first day, supposed day of creation, it's saying like it's separating light from darkness, and I can only assume that they really, what they mean by that is that hydrogen, the process of hydrogen fusion is, I guess, taking place where hydrogen is colliding with itself so strongly that it's creating helium and light, and that's giving us perspective of light and darkness, the separation of the first day. That's pretty much all that's being done, and then just studying hydrogen, it's like a superconductor, and it's also got super fluidity, and so I mean, and in a metallic state or in a high pressurized state, it appears black. So I feel like, or so-called black, and so I feel like, man, are we looking out at hydrogen, or is that what the ether or the cosmos is? Is it a lining of hydrogen? Because all the stars supposedly are like fueled by hydrogen fusion. So I would just assume that this is I guess the rudimentary explanation for what dark matter or melanin is hydrogen. And on the second day, it's saying like that they divide the waters, the upper waters from the lower waters, and from my readings, it was it was saying that the firmament, they were saying like the lightest metal is lithium, and that lithium is I guess like what the firmament is. I didn't know if that's what it would be or what, but I just wanted to get some clarity on that, because it was saying that like basically no other element in the group that lithium is in reacts with water, and it was like saying like since that the only thing happened on the second day is the division of waters. It's like that's it. There's no reaction with water, I guess. So that's all that was done. Like, so on a elemental level, it was just like the creation of lithium is what separates the upper waters and lower waters. I didn't know if that's the right element though. Damn, the screen thing.
Okay, how about now?
I hear you now.
Okay, not only can the screen not go out, but I can't put anything in front of the X screen. That is very odd. Okay, but what I did was I heard from one of my students who said that I should disable the screen display sleep mode on this particular phone. It only allows 10 minutes. Or if I turn on the camera and keep my face on the camera. So I've got those options. But I have to have my face on the camera and tell it not to turn off as long as my face is in front of the camera. So I feel like it's 10 minutes, and I'll keep an eye on that. So for 10 minutes, or in 10-minute intervals, I'll just keep tapping at 9.5 so it won't go off.
Okay. All right, and I'll clock it on my end too. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard what I was saying.
Yes, I did.
Okay, cool. So I just didn't know if lithium was like, if that was the Trinity, where it was like, in the beginning you got hydrogen, which through colliding with itself makes helium, and hydrogen's like Adam, helium is like Eve, lithium is the third part of the Trinity or something. Like, I didn't know if that was the allegory that was taking place there. I really wanted to get some clarity on that, because it seemed to make sense, but I haven't been studying chemistry, enough years of my life to really be sure.
Let's say that, remember to use your logic and creativity together, to not be afraid to go through the so-called veils that stop you from thinking in a profound way, and making premises that are logical or sound, or at least flow through. But before we even go into that level, that should automatically clarify or at least verify certain conjecture or speculation about intelligence, intellect, prior to this particular installment of Empire. You know, I mentioned that this particular installment of Empire is very arrogant, very so-called cocky in itself, thinking that this is the epitome of modernity, and it's not, which would mean that those who wrote this book of remembrance, those who, whether, as I said before, received or directly input this data, either way, whether they're writing in code, and more than likely they were, Shema wrote code, they had to have a knowledge of what today is basic chemistry. They were more profound in their knowledge of so-called chemistry. Today would be basic, still not at that level that they were then. And then there are those who are walking around. Their very presence, exemplify that deep original knowledge and logic. Those are the profound teachers, and this should clear that up automatically. Whether or not the questions that you ask are speculative, they still hold, they hold water, so they make sense when you look at it. Whether you look at it as an allegory, if you want to look at it direct as is, to various conclusions that this had to have occurred to be where we are today. Obviously, if we were just flesh and so-called spirit, what are those particular items made of? Or if they're made of something, they have to be made of something. At least the so-called Adam and the so-called Eve, they're made of what? A combination of all the various elements that you're referring to, with the dominant for one in particular or two in particular, that would be a representation of what they are. You can start off with one or two, and then you have a separation into a three. That would be a so-called triune or trinity, which would be represented in all of these very ignorant religions that have Trinity as a motif.
Yeah, no, it's it just seems like a common theme throughout the book and throughout chemistry, I guess, in a lot of ways, like how you got the ferromagnetic triad of iron, cobalt, and nickel. It seems like there's this constant, I guess, order to creation, and that everything, I guess, would have to play out in these ways, like no matter what. I don't know if it's just the script or the scripture, the code, like you said, like it's the binary code, like, because I guess atoms themselves are just made up of quarks, and quarks would make up the binary code of the atom. Like, I don't know, I've read that they say, like, oh, the Big Bang has started with this quark plasma gas that pressurized so much and everything and created everything. It precipitated the Big Bang. So,
something to bring that about, like you have flint, and you have stone, and you have a piece of straw or several pieces of wood. There's not going to be a fire unless other extenuating circumstances prevail, or they exist also. Well, in lieu of that, if you're in this so-called void, which is what you're told to envision or believe, that there's this void of matter, unassociated or disassociated matter that somehow coalesces together and then manifests a spark that then, like a snowball effect or an effect that cannot be stopped because it's just the start of it, then that had to have been brought about by some intellect, obviously, that initiated it. It didn't just haphazardly occur, because at what point would this have occurred? Haphazard, so-called random action, probability, etc., they have to have a spark or start. Something has to be the catalyst or the beginning phase that brings about a reaction. Nothing just remains. Things that do remain, even in the realm of the unliving, the non-living. I'm saying these terms just to be honest. I don't want to cause trouble on your stage. But in those realms, even in those realms, we see action-reaction occurring. The bones, as I mentioned before, where your connection to eternity resides, in the form of iron, in the form of molecules of iron. They still react and interact, even though the major part of that vessel is shut down for a time, or we would say is dormant for a time. But until those iron molecules go into other realms, so-called dust, they still function and can be preserved to go on in perpetuity, possibly, more than likely. I'm sure they do. Again, there has to be something that starts the stopping of a process as well as the starting of a process.
So what is the impetus that starts that? And like when you're looking at it on a biological level, you got things like an immortal cell line. What is it that makes this thing just continue to self-replicate, or to continue to, or to start even replicating? What is the impetus there?
It would appear on the surface that the realization of a place for so-called life is there, and therefore it's like a pre-program. If the circumstances are there, then manifest in all nooks, crannies, corners, manifest the source, manifest the creator, originator, creator, manifest that. And where it cannot be, and there's no place where it cannot be, obviously, then maybe it's the reverse of that. So it's not about what it cannot be, or what it is capable of. Obviously, it is capable of sparking or starting. It's also capable of just the reverse as well, which would be stopping something. But is it really stopping, or is it just reversing something in a different spin? And when we look at elements, when we look at particles, this is what they still haven't discovered in this realm through their physics and through their quantum physics, even so-called thermodynamics, still haven't come to any kind of actual conclusion. Everything is theoretical. And that obviously is not the case when you're reflecting upon so-called path, true path. Obviously, so we see the evidence in architecture, for one. We see it in the various scripts that you mentioned, in the writing, for those who can read them clearly. We see it there as well. But if you don't know it or comprehend it, it just comes across as a typical word. Whether you can read Latin, whether you can read Hebrew or even older languages, doesn't matter if you can read it, but do you see what's going on in between? Like reading in between the lines. I can look at a so-called chemistry book today. I might be able to understand the wording, but do I know what's happening, truly know what's happening, meaning I comprehend everything. I can manifest what's happening on the page in my mind, in my so-called mind, in my brain. That's a true 100% or holistic grasp everything going on, which does not occur in the indoctrination of ancient texts or so-called holy books, etc., nor in the self-education purposes, because usually when you just try to educate yourself, you're using the same system that taught you how to read in the first place. In order to be in the realm of self-edification, you go outside of the realm as best you can. It's difficult because when you try to go outside, you find yourself staying in that same satellite revolving system. You're going around and around the same education system, and your sources for material are probably the same text or the same writers or writers that are going to say the same thing. There are those who are not published, and they present a threat to that. And that threat is what you want to go for. You want to check out what the person who's threatening is, the one that is showing you more than likely what's really have truth in the Bible. And your question, that's why I say you start with a question. If anything, this existence started with a question. A question sparks an answer is the linguistic form, the verbal form of a chemical reaction. It starts with a question. And there are many types of questions. They're derogatory. You can start with an open-ended one. I have a closed-ended one that just requires a yes or a no. That would be the angelic realm. An open-ended question would be all that we know. It has potential, it can go on and on and on. It has potential to grow from the same source, so all it needs is one spark.
So that's the impetus, I guess. Just this, it was some sort of self-discovery. I've seen quotes that say things like the only reason that we look at things in like a sequence of time is because like the senses or the sensory organs can only pick up like one direction of things. They don't see like the backward flowing of things. They only see like the linear, I guess, dimension of things. They don't see the fact that as something is arriving, it's also leaving in some respects, I guess, like kind of like how like the past or in the future kind of aren't really a separate thing, I guess, in a sense. Like if something is
I like that. I like that visual of, saying goodbye, but also saying hello at the same time. We only see that which is going away, and we see it as one way only. There's nothing wrong with anything linear, no more than there's anything wrong with something that has a cyclical path or cycle path or a circle. There's nothing wrong with any of them. We are to know all of them. We do experience them all. It's when you only rely on one and only that as your perspective, where you end up in a setting of stagnation or true ignorance.
So the originator creator, people say things like it's a kid with an ant farm type thing or whatever. What would be the impetus? Like the originator creator, if they're asking a question, to create it, they're like, I guess let's see what I can create. Let's see what what will happen if I give will to somebody. Is that like the impetus?
When you think of people who conduct true experiments, not for the purpose of just irresponsible curiosity, but for a true curiosity that has a holistic approach to it. I'm not going to do the following because I know the outcome. You're taught that the supreme being, which is all the various names that are given, the references, you'll hear me use them, is all-knowing or omniscient and ever-present or omnipresent. And therefore, if you're omnipresent, that means you're always in the now. Everywhere is now. And no matter what, even the future, you know it now because it's always now. Omnipresent. It doesn't, most folks who hear these terms in English, they think in a linear fashion that present means right here in a linear sense, as in a directional sense, a place, a destination, a start. Well, actually, that's part of it. But it's not just that. It means that whatever will be is always here. You can look at it as so-called time. You know, when you hear the explanation of time being folded, so you're always here. No matter where you are, you're there, as opposed to having to get to a place. If your logic, if your thinking, if your knowing is based on that, then you'll always have to get to a place. There must be a knowing within, and as you go through the steps to revealing more knowledge, then no matter what occurs during that path, you still have that presence. This is not taught. I used to teach this to students who they were in my mentoring, and they were also in universities, and I would show them how to overcome stress or overcome that pull that makes them stressful, you know, passing an exam and everything that went with it. And I said, even in that so-called imbalance, you're thinking in terms of future, because you're thinking in terms of you don't want to fail, because if you fail, this won't happen, this grade point average will not be acceptable, you won't get that position, you won't get that high pay, et cetera, et cetera. Aren't you doing the exact same thing that I'm showing you how to do now? And then they have that realization, that thinking in terms of it's already happened. It's almost like thinking in an omniscient way. It's already happened. You've already taken that exam. And everything you've done in the past is already now. And it is. And whether you studied or crammed or didn't, it's all in there collectively, whatever it is. And also the act of finishing the exam. So I would have them think or envision that moment they stop with that test, you know, it's electronic, or if they're using a pen or pencil, when they put that pencil down and literally had that feel of relief. Didn't really care what the so-called grade was, which is that momentary feel of relief because it was done and they can now move on. So several things came out of that. I said, you see how you stagnate yourself in order to reach a destination, and when that destination is reached, you feel released. But you shouldn't feel released just because the destination is there. The destination is now within. You can call it an idea, but the strength of that idea will get you through all of the steps that you have to take in order to get there. So you're not concerned or worried that you're going to get there. As long as you put forth all that you know you have within you to get there, or the so-called there, it will occur because it's already happened. You're not looking at it in terms of what's going to happen and if it happens, or when you get there, what will be the result. You're not looking at it that one. So there's no pressure on you, at least. At least it releases that pressure. And then I was asked, well, what if they fail the exam? I said, well, that too is the same thing. And that pertains to your past. What are you doing? What have you done in order to make sure that that doesn't occur? So here are examples of you controlling a future to a degree, because someone could deliberately fail you. Can you still hear me? The screen went off for a second.
Oh yeah, I hear you fine. I still hear you fine. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's similar to Ecclesiastes, where he was, you know, when Solomon is just basically saying that, like, man, there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing, everything that, and basically what you're saying, like that everything that I can think of, it has already been done. It's already existed, and it will, you know, if it is, if it happened, it will be, and so it is. It is more than will be. So, like, yeah, I guess to celebrate a place that you're going to arrive to is more so like, is no different than being like, I'm glad that the airport exists or something. It's like a location more than I guess it's not like I don't know what you would call that, but yeah, it's more so like a location instead of something that's actually real progression on the inside.
These are the steps to growth and true growth.
Nothing is supposed to stay stagnant. Nothing is supposed to stay within the confines of what it arrived in. It's supposed to grow out of that. What you get in an empire situation, well, at least in this one definitely, and probably in the one previous, is you get a promotion of what some call death. You get a promotion of cocooning, where you're really not, and you don't see it. You don't see that you're in the same shell. You come from sac, come out of a sac, two sacs actually, and then you go into a placental sac, and then you're in another one when you arrive in this particular plane. But this one is set up so that you don't really notice it or cannot see it, and now you have another set of, you want to call them challenges to go through. This one made up of those elements that you're not really observing. If you were to observe, which would mean it takes some level of knowing, and it's okay to read to find out, to see what the so-called scholars say about it. And you start to recognize the waters below and the waters above also exist as the waters within, or the waters around you. You don't see water around you, but guess what? You have to have water around you because it's part of this so-called element that you know of as so-called air and so-called oxygen. There's a level of hydrogen in this realm, obviously. So we are in a sea. We're in our own format.
So it's kind of like intercellular fluid and internal fluid inside the cell and external fluid outside of the cell.
Mm-hmm.
So
perfect way of putting it.
So yeah, it's just the nature of the pattern of the creation is like this is how creation is experienced in itself. I guess this is the format.
Well, for us, that's why we're here, and not only us, obviously, many other life forms that are support systems or support for us, and not only support for us, but primarily support for this realm. Without them, there's no realm here, and we are kind of some call stewards within the realm, and everything else that goes on literally is a distraction, deliberate distraction. The stripe that you see around you is a deliberate distraction. You are now participating in your own cocooning, and if you've ever seen a silkworm in a cocoon, the cocoon remains, but you have this little thing inside. It sounds like a rock or a pearl, and people collect them, but that poor little creature inside is nothing more than a husk. It's in its own eternity now.
So when a creature is when they pass on, is it like a rebalancing of like the osmotic pressure? Like how the cell, like the cells of the tissue of the body, like they have to balance the osmotic pressure, and if not, if that doesn't happen, then I guess like you can have death. Is that what death is? Like in a grand scale, like for people, like oh well, the overall balance here, this osmotic pressure, like you got to go out and then you got to leave and go into this other, state in order to balance out the osmotic pressure of the collective.
Yeah, you see this in the so-called natal process. You see it in that process, but it happens on all levels within this realm, I think. You stay here for a time, and then everything that you've come here to do, or placed here for, is you're now ready to move forward from it. Is there manipulation? More than likely. Because you see that some stay for 1,000 years, some stay for 900, some stay for 150, some stay for 50, some stay for 10. And I would think that anything under a certain number, triple-digit number at least, is premature. And as you see, anything that comes through that's not gone its complete term is considered premature.
so-called preemies or premature birth. Same thing after that, people coming and going in a premature way, especially when I say going, I don't mean in a linear sense. But I mean not fulfilling everything that they're supposed to fulfill, and never even being on the path of what they're supposed to fulfill because they're so distracted by their own indulgences and the things around them. Very premature, and that's like that little stillbirth who never really experiencing anything.
Yeah, it's I mean that when it comes to the arrival process and I guess the exiting process, if people were living, everything would have a different approach. If you knew you'd live 150 years, middle age is 75, so you'd have children at a different time. Everything would be different. You'd do everything different. Like you wouldn't. There would be no haste as far as certain things. Like, why would you rush to get married or rush to have sex or rush to do certain things? It wouldn't make any sense. But
based on the calendar, all those particular acts are not based on a grounding in or a connection to true purpose, and definitely not done with respect for originator creator. You know, you're said to do things, at least in Psalms, it mentions to do things with honor, respect, and joyfulness as you recognize that this is a profound experience, a wonderful experience, but you see all around you just the opposite.
Yeah,
and you play a part in it.
Yeah, I think it just happens when you don't know the elements, when you don't really go to elementary school, like actually get the elements instilled, to where you can actually observe reality. Because then there's no admiration, for or appreciation for what you're experiencing. I think if you don't really know the nature of the fabric, like what all went into the fabric to get this experience, like. There's no respect for, there when you don't have any perspective, I think. What
are the elements that you're getting in elementary school? Elements of what?
You're just getting taught how to be a slave and how to be institutionalized in the present day one.
Is that an element? Can we break that down to an element? Because, using the term, and, you asked a profound question and made a profound statement there. Elementary school. What are the elements? Is there an elemental table? Well, you can kind of connect the so-called grading that goes with it, grading system, grading levels. So is there a grade that equals or is equivalent to a particular element? So let's say first grade would be hydrogen. Or kindergarten, that hydrogen level. It's called elementary school. Element meaning the basics. So what are the basic elements? There's no basic elements, obviously, that are being shown, because for one, you have to pay homage to, or at least respect to, the element, the original element. And that would mean that the formative being, the so-called child, would have to learn chemistry. And that would be taught early, literally, if this is elementary school. But you're taught that you don't have the capacity for it. Like, you're taught simple things. That's the reason for the cocooning starts then. You're mummified, almost mummified. Things that are mummified, they are no longer in this realm, but their eternity is being preserved because their other functions are no longer. That's not the case with the living, breathing soul. That's still within that paradox of eternity and infinity, if you will. But what occurs then is you have a so-called child being mummified. Hence the reason why you notice mostly all schools, 99% of the schools, they don't have male at all in those formative. If they do, it might be a principal
principal, it might be a vice principal, it might be a coach, but you're not going to find males at all. There's no true balance of anything. And one of the things you recognize, that what you mentioned at the very beginning, is that there's this balance connection that must exist. That is a violation in all things done in these worlds. There's no balance. There's no masculine, feminine balance. One either denies one or denies the other. And that you can say would be the most, I guess, the primitive or early form of disconnection. Battling between the masculine and feminine.
The only male teacher I think I had in those years was like a gym teacher. It was only males in the school. I think like the principal, the gym teacher, and the janitor. I think all the teachers I think were women growing to like
That's the typical experience for most.
Till like sixth grade, there was one. I think there was, and I never had his class, but I think that was the only one. And then it wasn't. And then in high school, I had a few, but yeah, you don't get really any representation of male teachers, men being teachers, unless it's gym. You know, it's like
correct.
Yeah. So
just the opposite in the realms of those who are learning and knowing elements. Whether it be certain cultural schools that, when I say cultural, I'm referring to religious cultural, or certain levels of caste system, wealth, they know full well that's why their setups are different. Especially if you look at the formative years for many of the wealthy, so-called wealthy families, that being the latter part of the 19th century and so-called turn of the century, where you had boarding schools, you had various schools that were single gender, and genders got together for the purpose of socializing, and that was done under chaperoning systems, so that they know how, there's a level of etiquette and matchmaking, all of that so that they can maintain that caste, that so-called class. And we have classes in school. You go to class in school, but as you said, you are being inculcated to stay within a class. Those of you listening now who have experienced the opposite of what we're referring to, you would be an example of those who are being bred and manicured, if you will, for a particular elemental level. Anything that's carbon-based is not of an upper level. It's considered, low, dirt, not worthy of respect, etc.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to elements, again, like I think it's people just don't. If they saw they could see the connection between the way life unfolds on a microscopic level. Then I think the macro, this stuff, you could appreciate the, I guess, supposed mundane events from day to day, how they unfold. I think it's just really difficult if you've just been taught to, like you said, be in a cocoon and be institutionalized and be in a class, like you said, and be used to pretty much just having class warfare played on you, and then so then you don't look at anything. You look at everything very, very flat. You don't see all the dimensions to it, and I mean that's the thing. Like when as far as the creation story, on the third yam or the third day, it says like land and water. Land and the Creator separates the land and water, produces land and water, and it's like the next group of elements is carbon, magnesium, phosphorus, silicon, and it all makes sense. Like if you're looking at this in an elemental level, it's like hydrogen fusion produces helium fusion. Helium fusion produces eventually you get to carbon, and then carbon fusion creates oxygen fusion, which creates silicon fusion, and then you get then you get to iron, which there's no more fusion at that point. and it's just attraction, or I don't know if you want to call it implosion, but I think that like this is amazing I feel like to witness or to kind of come into the idea of what's going on around you. And like in the Bible, it's saying like on the fourth yom or the fourth day, the Creator creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. And that makes it impossible for it to have been a solar day. Because how could it be the fourth day if there's no sun yet? It's not even possible for it to have been. Like, so a yom or a day is some sort of other fathomable period that people don't even, I don't think we really have a good idea of what that really means, with the fourth period or the fourth periodic period, what that means in this creation of the sun, the moon, and the stars. Like, what are these periods? Like, just like in class, like in a school, you got periods in a day. You got 45-minute periods or 90-minute blocks and stuff. And so I think our relative, what we think a period is just completely jaded. And it's almost like the same way, like when I was learning the metric system, I was like, wow, you can extrapolate this out and see like how, you got centimeters, meters, you get the kilometers, and it all makes sense, and you can get like a good range for like, oh, this is 100 meters away. Or if a lot of the times if somebody said 300 feet away, if you don't have a grasp for 100 feet, then there's no real, it's like an arbitrary figure. So I think that like when people talk about the Bible or creation, if we're talking about days or periods, we don't even really know what that means, because we have no real reference for what a period actually is. Like, what is a period or a yom? What does the Bible mean by that?
That's where people make connections. They try to draw correlations. So they might, some scholars might say that there could be similarities between a yuga and a yom, possibly. So they then collect data that shows them either through languages and words that the two are connected. Take, for example, the references of measurement. Yeah, these are just measurements. So when you measure something, it has to be related to some type of time or timing and matter. Cubits, for example, and that's spelled with the C, allegedly, in English, versus the qubit with the Q, have connection. The so-called quantum bit of a qubit with the Q, they use that now in what is called quantum computing. Of masculine and feminine in the sense, you would say that they split. So here we have a qubit, which is a measurement of physical, and a qubit with a Q as a measurement of something that cannot be touched, in the sense that it's related to information. The qubit being the basic unit, a bit, allegedly, and then the Q standing, I guess, for the quantum. But you have in the so-called quantum bit, and those who might know more can make a correction, if you will, but from what I have studied, the classical bit, or 0 or 1, and the qubit, quantum bit, it's both 0 and 1 at the same time. And that's supposedly, according to their, I would call it mathematics, but according to their science, it's called superposition. So a superposition in the elements would be a position of atoms that are together. We see these in molecular bodies, molecular connections. I usually use those references when I refer to a particular molecule or a particular of a vitamin, for example, or so-called nutrient. I'll do that deliberately to show that these are connected, and within these connections, These are just basically the most primal, the smallest connection of life, so-called life, or that which we are and that which we exist within. Allegedly, I say allegedly because some have to have a gauge. There has to be some empirical witness, data, and a witness in order for it to be sound or for it to be true. Well, for the most part, you can say that about yourself and anything, about your heart and your liver. Have you seen it? You've seen photos of or drawings of or depictions of a liver or someone else's liver. So therefore you make the connection that if they had one and you are told you need one, then therefore you must have one, and you can visualize it. So the same thing with these minute elements. You haven't seen it or them, but they're there. We can say the same thing for what you would call God. If you haven't seen God, you haven't even seen a so-called prophet of old, but yet the words and I call them catalytic words, or catalytic words, because they create reactions within those who read them or hear them. That's manifesting all of the element reaction action, chain reaction, and it's a non-stop ongoing thing. As long as we hear it and we have some ability to recognize and comprehend it. But even if you didn't, it's still going in there. Chemical reactions, any kind of reaction in those realms happen regardless. And if they are motivated by intellect, they still happen. The only difference is there a difference. Obviously, there is a difference. You'd be manifesting in the realm of matter based on deliberate manipulation of smaller unit building blocks. So there is your reference, your empirical answer that, there has to have been a manipulation of these references that Taylor is referring to. We are talking about these elemental references. There has to have been intellect, and there was and is intellect that started the spark, or started the action-reaction. Hence the reason I say originator-creator or creator-originator. So I'll just finish up and then you can go on to the next topic if you like, about I mentioned about cubits, and I did that for a reason, because when we think of measurements, most people have heard cubits before in terms of Noah, so-called Noah and the ark. Well, what is an ark but a hard drive, if you will, or storage device to carry things through so that they can be accessed, or in this instance, so they can access. So something in an ark, or in an ark, would have to have a certain level of measurement in order to have a capacity. When we think of timing, we think of capacity. We think of a day, there has to be capacity to that so-called day. Remember the transliteration into English, so it may or may not be a day. A day might, definitely, obviously, is inaccurate. There's more to it than just that. In fact, the word might even be a misnomer in the sense that day can also refer to deity.
So, yeah, I mean, I it's crazy that I've never made that connection, because they always spell it with the Q. It did throw me off. The cubit in the cubit of the ark, and the cubits of anything being built in the Bible. The Temple of Solomon, any of the temples, like when they're going through numbers and they're talking about like building and making things and measuring things, it's always in cubits. And
correct.
Yeah, and I never made that connection.
That it's being used today. Because you remember, these are imposters, if you will, or hybrids that are not originators, so all they have is the copy. And it might seem innovative, but it's not at all. When you recognize this, that allays any fears. It should. But again, you have, I think you have a Bible online, I think the instructions are in Genesis. I'm sure they are. Have to be. It would be in Genesis 6. Look under. I know Genesis chapter 6 is where a lot of things are mentioned in a concise, formatted, coded way. But Genesis 6:12 or 6:15 or 6:13, somewhere in there, you get these instructions. And those instructions, and I'll also refer to Solomon as well, Temple of Solomon or Solomon's Temple. But in Genesis, you have 300 cubits, and you have, I remember this clearly, it was 300 by 50 by 30, which sounds small in a sense. But if you were to convert that, if it's from your not your ring finger, but your longest finger to your elbow, that was allegedly a cubit, and therefore that's about a foot, depending, close to it. If you're male or female, I'd be smaller than a foot, but approximately it's around 450 feet. So that's pretty long, and by 75 feet by 45. How do we turn that into cubits with a cube for computing purpose? Well, we can just do the math on that, even though they don't want you to make that connection, quantum bit and the qubit bit, their qubit measurement, there is a connection. So, for example, if we're talking about capacity, then what they have today pales in comparison to the capacity then. From what I do a little research, the capacity for the strongest, most powerful computing system does not even come close to that. So, for example, the length converted from qubit, let's say 300 qubits, would be, and I did the math, I wrote it down there, I think would be around the equivalent of the 300 by 50 by 30 would equate to around 450,000 qubits with the cube. There's no computer at this moment in so-called timing, in this hegemony, in this empire. There's no computer with that capacity.
Yeah, I think it's like 10. I think it's like 10. It's like $10,000 a qubit or something. I heard, like, just to get one qubit, it's like $10,000.
Correct. And so that would be, quantum capacity. And in order to get 450,000 qubits, you would require what type of system? You would require an organic system, and that would mean you would require everything that has computer capacity or storage capacity and computing capacity, in addition to almost every living creature, especially all sentient. So let's say all sentient had neural link chips in them, you could utilize them, and there's your 450,000 qubits. And you can make an entirely new realm within the, I think Google was attempting to do something like that, but they only have a few hundred qubits with a cube.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole nother level of processing power.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think a lot of these folks behind the scenes, not their actors and front office people, but behind the scenes, this is what the spirit realms are working on. When I say spirit realms, I don't mean ghosts, I mean actual people, flesh people, but they're under the control, if you will, voluntary control of spirits. And the purpose is to preserve and reboot so-called creation using the Q bit with the Q. And so it's not carrying animals, it will be carrying information like the blueprint for life, genetics, ecosystems, and all of the spiritual code. That's the thing that I haven't gone into, and I'll do that in the pod. So there are spiritual codes, and you have actually accessed some of them in the book that you might have read. They're spiritual codes. The Bible contains a few spiritual codes. So all of these would be like a big so-called divine hard drive or a cosmic default encoded in so-called quantum potential.
So, like, is it like kind of like how I've read different interpretations of the Tao Te Ching, where they say the Tao Te Ching is a spirit, and then I've heard in the Meta Netter series, he's saying that the Meta Netter is an oracle, and then the I Ching is the oracle. So these are like programs that are metaphysically or etherically existing, and then they protrude into the physical via these books, I guess.
You have to know the codes, and codes are always used for various reasons to pass information through enemy lines to reach only a particular audience, and in order to do what? To be a catalyst for something, some type of action or reaction. Again, we're there, the action-reaction stage of always.
So that's like the same thing with the dreams, as far as like dreams being cryptic codes. It's like only the true self will be able to crack this cryptic message, and the false self or the parasites within the dream or in the body that's experiencing this dream with the true self, they wouldn't be able to crack the code. They have the true self is the only one that will be able to receive the message.
Exactly, and many are misled to think, oh, you're referring to the subconscious. No, that's the red herring. That's the, as they say in the mystery novels, the McGuffin or McDuffet. It's the thing that defers you from. It looks on the surface as legit, but it's part of the programming that has you compartmentalized, that has you separated within self. You know, they say, oh, it's the female side, the conscious side. No, it's not. In fact, you have a little nexus that's right on your very brain that shows the two so-called hemispheres work in tandem. And therefore, as you said just now, when I taught about the true self many moons ago, that true self is not just wouldn't be a compiler. You can call it a compiler, but it is a necessary component in knowing your dreams. That should have been known by all those who have listened to past podcasts. They should have picked up on that, but this is the first time it's being said. So that true self that I have always talked about, that is your decoder, and you know all of the various things, again, through those podcasts, of from the encumbrances to the obstacles, et cetera, that you take on, that you purposely put yourself through or indulge in just because, and that you expose yourself to or have been exposed to. This creates those facades, those patterns that you think are you believe are you feel are you, and they're blocking you from that which is truly you. Get to that layer, that level, if you will, of you before all of these connections, these false connections, the distraction. Get to that, and then that will be the way you know your dreams and comprehend your dreams. You don't have to it doesn't take forever to do so, and it shouldn't. You don't have forever, for one. And you want to do that while you're here. These are the challenges while here. You don't want to end up in that cocoon stage because of just food. You'll just and food gets fragmented, as you already know, because you eat food and you see how it's fragmented for the purpose of going into a particular realm.
So if you miss your dreams, if you're missing your dreams constantly, is that just like your mailbox just getting full with a bunch of cryptic mail and you're just not reading any of it? So it's like at some point your mailbox is full and you can't even.
And there's important messages in there in addition to crap that you don't need. You get a lot of spam. I like that reference. You get a lot of spam in your dreams that you don't require, that you didn't ask for, but you picked up as a result of being open. You get a lot of spam that comes your way, what you might have, you didn't sign up for, but you're going to get it anyway. And all that just adds to that which you have to declutter. You're going to have to go through it anyway and delete a lot in order to get to the real information, the real data that matters, and that you are to utilize right now, which is one of the reasons for dreaming. You know, the messages to the true self, communicating to you, telling you, okay, this is related to your health, your overall well-being, or the situation that you are going to find yourself in because of the connection. And if you don't see them, well, you're living haphazard.
that, I wouldn't even say it's animalistic, but you can say to a degree it is kind of animalistic. But animals have shown very extreme deliberation in many instances. You might have profound actions or interconnections and circumstances with everything from so-called insects to mammals, smaller mammals. And it just seems odd because you're not used to seeing it. But they communicate in their way, in their own realm. And you can read that. But if you're not being able to read that, ask yourself, what are you distracted by? And what else are you being distracted from? There's a lot. There's a lot that you're being distracted from. Just know that. And you don't have to continue in that manner. You shouldn't want to.
Yeah, I mean, dreams, it seems like that's paramount. That would be your connection to objective reality.
The connection to elements and beyond, if you want to say it.
So, I guess continuing with the theme here, like I said, on the fourth yam, the sun, the moon, and the stars are created, and then it's like the next group of the elements, like nitrogen is in there, and it was saying like there's two different types of stars. You got old stars and younger stars, and I think it was the older ones. I think it was the older ones that use nitrogen fusion. Nitrogen fuses with the hydrogen to make helium and light, and that's how the star powers itself. And I was just wondering though, like, what is is this a euphemism as well as far as the stars? Like, because are the stars the souls? So it's a lot of questions I guess I have here. Like, are the stars souls, or is it like a portal for souls? And like, just looking into things like sonoluminescence is like stars. They look like bubbles. If you look at them like on a Nikon camera and zoom in, it looks like a bubble, and it looks like that. I really don't know. Like, what are the stars the souls, or is it just a portal for souls? Like, is a constellation like almost like a platform when you're about to board a train or something? Is it like that kind of thing for consciousness?
When you think about so-called stars, that's why I just refer to these bodies, celestial bodies, you think based on what you have been shown or what has been depicted, some type of art, programming, propaganda, but have you really seen the close-up? Not depiction, but the actual close-up of a so-called star. The sun is allegedly a so-called star, and that's about the closest that you've come to a so-called star in the sense of the visualization and your own, if you have eyes to see, the sensors to see, in your own perspective, your own experience, you can actually see this brilliance in the firmament. But again, you make a correlation between that and so-called other celestial bodies, and you say that, okay, they too must be stars. Well, you're told that hydrogen makes up most of the elemental material of many stars, and then of course there are other types of stars that are allegedly of other materials, nitrogen, et cetera, as you mentioned. But this is all speculative. No one has actually gone up and taken a medicine dropper and extracted some of the star material. None of the so-called star material has fallen, allegedly. Then you know from what? You know from rays? And rays would have to be more than just a ray or frequency. There would have to be matter. You can do something to that matter. Or it manifests itself in the form of life forms, whether it's a plant, and you can analyze the third effect or the tertiary effect of that so-called celestial body or so-called star in a plant, or you might see it in so-called photosynthesis. But again, you don't have an actual direct connect to the sun, let alone stars, so-called stars. So where are these other suns? You're told that this particular one is so rare that there aren't many like it. And then, of course, the planetary bodies that are near it, there's only one Earth, or not many that are like it in terms of so-called Earth realm or planetary bodies. And I've heard many scholars say otherwise. I've heard them call Earth a star, a type of star. So again, these are all theoretical.
Yeah, it's not
explanation.
It's not like an observable reality. Like, at least in sonoluminescence, you can actually go through the process of observing a bubble collapsing and creating light. So, whereas, like, yeah, you kind of don't really, everything is kind of just hearsay as far as what's on the other side of the firmament or beyond, or however. I don't know. I don't know if the stars are on this side of the firmament. I really don't know. I mean, so much stuff is a lie because they say that space is a vacuum. How could there be a big nothing or a little nothing? If it's nothing, if it's a vacuum, it is not possible. That it doesn't make sense. So much other stuff doesn't make sense. Like, but I remember one time you were telling me, like, we were driving, and you were like, you see how the sun is hitting the road there. You see how, like, the light is, you can basically see, because hydrogen is what's creating light, and water is predominantly hydrogen. So it's like all the elements are getting created off this light. And you look at the road down. We were like, look down the road. You see it's hot out. You see the waves coming off the road in the distance, and it's like the light from the atmosphere, from the sun. I don't know how you want to look at it. That's creating all the other levels of the elements, and so. I've seen things in science videos, I guess you could say, where they say the only reason you can see light is because the air, and that when you go out into space, you can't see light because it's a vacuum and there's no air, and that's why you don't see the stars or the lights or whatever out in space. So a lot of that just seems like a stretch, and you're getting away from observable reality at that point. And I haven't seen any good space videos. They all look doctored. So. And
they are. Yeah. They are. Again, I mentioned before, you can at your choice, but you shouldn't have this incredulous mindset when it comes to fathoming that which is allegedly unfathomable. So, for example, confederacies and conspiracies working in conjunction to maintain the hegemony, and one of them being, the so-called space and space programs, etc., and all that extra stuff. That's a conspiracy, and those are Confederates. Many of the people who indulge in maintaining this, they're in academia, they're in media, they're in politics. So you would never think that because of that incredulous mindset. You cannot have that type of mindset. You have to recognize that, yes, many work together to maintain what you see before you. They obviously are sworn to secrecy. So something benefits them, and whatever is benefiting them, it helps them to maintain that secrecy level. They're never going to divulge or disclose truth. And then, of course, there are those who just don't know the truth, and they will eat and swallow and spit out, chew, and live in that which they are given or spoon-fed. They expect you to do the same, and not to question. Or at least if you question within their context, the context that just leads you right back into the same loop of go nowhere, non-logic. And that's not what you want. You have the capacity to go beyond that with your questions, especially. If you're not getting those answers, then you go beyond those and you can start asking yourself and getting the data on your own from what you see, what you witness. I use this so-called sun as an example. This is reference to your argument. And again, people have to know what these words mean. We're not fighting, so argument doesn't mean fight. But in any case, based on the argument your statements that you've made, we would use the sun as our reference and our only so-called nearby example of what stars. So it would be like our random sampling. It would be our closest sampling
to what we are told is a star, or so-called star. And then what can we know from it? We know that it has some type of brilliance, but so do creatures that live below a certain level in the so-called ocean. They have this luminescence within. So the fireflies, even at night, they have this luminescence. Do they have heat? So is the heat coming from this light, so-called light source in the sky? Or is it a connection of elements that radiate heat and that it has to come into connection with that which is here in order to get that heat and that water also? So when you pointed out that experience of looking down the road and seeing that mirage effect or that glimmering water effect as if you're going into a puddle or you're going into a lake and there is no lake. Well, actually, you are in a sense going into a lake. It's a lake within the air, in the ether. And that's as a result of the sun. Interplay or interweaving or interconnection between Earth, so-called Earth elements, and the rays of the sun, which are actually elements as well. You're taught to separate photons from elements, but photon has its own elements too. So-called photons.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to people hiding the knowledge, there has to be something that they are benefiting from after death, because you would think that enough people would have reached a point where they're going to be on their deathbed and they would just divulge everything to the world. But for some reason, they die with the lie or the obfuscation or omission of the truth. So for some reason, they're committed beyond death to this lying or whatever you want to call it, and or omission of truth. So what is it that they, what would make you, like, if you're, this supposed synagogue of Satan or whatever, if you're this adversarial, if you're from that camp, I guess, what is it that they're promised that even makes them think that I should hold on to this through death?
It would be that it has to do with no promise and no place to go, in the sense of some place to go. That is their impetus or their rationale behind maintaining levels of secrecy. So staying here could be, more than likely is, the carrot. This ties into what I mentioned about the so-called light. We're told that a so-called photon has nothing. It's
massless.
Right, massless, exactly. No mass, no charge, no structure like a molecule or an atom. But it does have its own element. So that element hasn't been explored because this is an ignorant realm feigning to be an intelligent realm or hegemony, and it's not. And we see this all the time. If it was intelligent, there would be no warring. All of these so-called inventions, which are not, they are theft invention. These are like throwing something to a Neanderthal and saying, okay, here's a cell phone, program it, or learn how to use it. Eventually they'll learn how to use it, but it will be in the worst way. And this is what we're seeing now. Therefore, what would draw someone from truth? They would have to not want truth from the start, or at least during over a period of time. They have developed an allegiance to not necessarily a cause, but to a group and a cause. So it doesn't matter, the threat of annihilation or so-called demise means nothing, very little. So you can tell someone, okay, you're going to meet your maker. They probably know otherwise. They're not going to meet anything. And the purpose is to remain here if possible, for as long as possible. And in that, they ground their total focus or belief, and nothing else can shake them. And you add to that the allegiance, which some consider a promise or commitment or even a covenant, and they won't break it, no matter who it is, their own children, or if the world, allegedly, if the world depended on it for life, they still wouldn't tell. And then, of course, there's the more insidious type. They will tell you something with the purpose of misleading, because it's like the ultimate get over and the ultimate joke, the last joke, they have the last laugh. Many have done that. You know, they're seen as legit. It causes confusion because there are those who do tell truth at their last physical moment. But if they're caught up in that cohort, no one is going to know who is who or what is what. But you can, with most things, you can tell who is true, and who is a part of the parasitic realm. The promise for some who have been initiated is to remain here and to return after a particular time frame.
So I guess if you are a graft, then there's that is I guess essentially the best deal for you if you can even come to understanding that much.
Mm-hmm. That is true. There are actual tests. They claim to be actual tests that show that melanin is the only substance from here, which is not from here, but the only substance that can go through the radiation of so-called space intact.
Yeah, that's why I was saying that the hydrogen supposedly is like a superconductor, and it has super fluidity. It's the only thing that something can flow through without resistance and without energy loss. And so, if we're looking out into the supposed blackness of space, or just this melanin field or whatever that is, then that's the only thing that could be conducted through, that could get through, that could make it have the fluidity to get through the firmament. And because it was like, I was reading into like the Meissner effect, and it was saying that like that the concentrated or pressurized hydrogen, it expels like magnetic fields, and that's how you get like magnetic levitation. And I was like, well, I guess it's on a spiritual level or ethereal level that's what would just be taking place organically, like that you would just levitate and have like super conductivity coming out of this place, and then you'd be able to come back in, I guess, at will if you wanted to, if you are of you melanin, that capacity's there.
Again, a level of knowing has to be present, and even if the holder of, or the one who possesses that melanin could do that, they would have to know how to do that. And much of the knowledge has been erased, if you will, or is dormant for most. So even the spirit realm, or I should call the graft one, they have limited capacity in terms of knowledge, leftover knowledge. One thing is for certain, so if we look at the realm of parasites, for example, in the realm of internal parasites especially, the ones that require a host, they have no melanin. They're either white or translucent. And there's a reason for that. So everything has a reason. One of the reasons is to maintain,
for continuity.
To hide, and for continuity, exactly. So they can also hide in a realm that would be hostile for them. And here we are in a larger realm. We're not, like the parasites. Some might be, many might be, where they only have the host of this realm as a host, and those that are within it in order to thrive. But without them, there's no place to be. So therefore, if they have that parasitic spirit, then they would have to remain here. There is no outside of here. So like parasite, the internal parasite, they have to remain in host. So this realm would be like the host. And for those who are of that parasitic kind, they would have to remain here.
So what is it about pheomelanin? I've heard people say things like it's sulfur based and different things like that. What is the, I guess the makeup of pheomelanin, and what would its role be? Is it just a lack of melanin that just it's like a degraded melanin?
Well, it is sulfur based, but again, it is, and yes, you could say it is a degraded form, but it also is a telltale sign that there's been manipulation. One has to come outside, once again, of the vanity program, the vanity spirit of this realm. That's one of the big ones. I'd say it's up there with the top 10, if you will, or top 5, the vanity realm. It's used for many purposes. One of them is to keep you in fear. You can't go against your government or so-called authority, in this case, false authority, because they've got bombs, they've got guns, they've got men at their disposal. Yes, they've got all of that, but that's not supposed to put fear into you. If that does, then fear stops you from actually truly thinking. Well, vanity goes with it too. So you hear many repeat memes and propaganda of what innovations exist. There are innovations, it's true, but most of them, again, are back technology, or what do they call it? You take something that's already existed and you just try to tinker with it, take it apart, and put it back together again.
Reverse engineering.
A lot of reverse engineering, exactly. Many of.
Oh, your screen go out? Damn. Pharaoh, I don't know if you can hear me, man, but I can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you, but you can't hear me. Okay, I'm back in the screen went out. All right, pardon that.
You were saying reverse engineering?
Reverse engineering,
yeah.
Back engineering, exactly. These are all an innovative way, so-called innovative ways that you see as innovation. You're told are innovation. In actuality, they're not. But they have a gagging effect when you think that, especially in a war militarized empire. And then, of course, the vanity also says that there's no path that matches your present. That should automatically tell you this place is false. This empire is a lie, in the sense that it has not innovated or invented anything. The people who are at the helm in their ancestry, they have been stolen, and you see that this is what colonization is. Parasites live in colonies, by the way. So you see this colonizing going on, but it's nothing new either. Colonizing has been going on prior to. And people can refer to past live lectures where you asked me about who was the first to break a rule in the sense of the allegory, and I said that it would have been the line of Canaan that actually broke the rules, going in places where they weren't supposed to be. They have the knowledge to do so, but just because you do doesn't mean you should. The knowledge to defile that which is natural and organic to life, fruit, food, so you can, but should you? Well, it's kind of the same thing. So we're seeing that in form in our so-called time. And therefore, what came before, what preceded, is definitely not what you have been fed. You're taught that you come from this square one, very rudimentary level, and then you work your way up through the agrarian, through the hunter-gatherer, to the war machine, et cetera, so on. That might hold true for a particular grouping, but it's not for the masses of new melanin carriers. No, we didn't come from that. We came from a high start. And as a result of a lot of vices, a lot of infighting, a lot of just not being respectful, especially of originator creator, you fall. And here you are. So that vanity blocks you from accepting or realizing even, or even considering that there are manufactured beings in our realm today. That someone manufactured beings, and no one wants to face that. It would break it down. It would be part of the slow breaking down of deterioration of the hegemony. That's why you cannot tell certain people that they were slaves. If you classify yourself as white, you cannot say that and then teach it. You can say it in passing in order to disquiet those who ask for reparations, for example. You say, oh, everybody's a slave. Well, but you're not going to go and say, okay, well, everyone's a slave, and then admit to it and put it in the books, and then inculcate, indoctrinate, push and push and push, and then make movies about it, put it into the mainstream. We need a white group then. We need a white Kunta Kinte. We need to push that into the, and then you'll see the self-esteem and everything else that goes with it deteriorate. You'll see the pulling down of churches and all of the iconography, like, well, wait, the God that we see on these images cannot be God, because how could it have allowed white slavery? No differently than it could allow the so-called, you notice you don't say black slave, because the programming, the spirit wants you to associate by default so-called black with slavery as if that is what so-called blacks are. Most of the mainland Africans won't call themselves black, by the way, because they know the deal for the most part. Black is shunning, and it means you've been bleached out, blacklisted, blank. So they know for well. When you step into that, or if you get pushed into that, many times you'll see people who are pushed into that once they come out of it. It's like, oh, no, don't confuse me with that group. Because they know there's a difference. They know that there is a difference. But you see what's happening today in the programming is to make you lose sight of that and lose sight of your own connections in the thing. That's just the thing. But in terms of these connections with the loss of melanin, or the annihilation of melanin, loss and then annihilation, it led to one connected to the other. You had a loss of melanation as a result of manufacturing. And I don't mean, some company like Shell Oil released something into the water and it turned people pale and made them lose their melanin. Although that is happening right now with many companies, affecting pale and eumelanin as a result of the hegemony area. But I'm not referring to that. I'm saying that actual laboratory making. But don't think of laboratories today. If you do, you're doing that, trying to say that you're the epitome and then match it. These are labs that you would not believe in a million years that existed. You kind of see some on walls. You have to know how to read the code, and you'll see that these are beyond modern people, with the capacity to do things such as lift rock, split granite, etc., go into the genes. If we talk about elements and the references to elements in ancient books, well, you would have to know what an element is. You would have to have seen an element. You would have to have known what a molecule is or structure is. You would have to have known and seen a celestial body, not with just obviously with the naked eyes, unless what goes with longevity of 1,000 years are telescopic eyes. Who knows? But I don't think so. But I do know that the capacity and the wherewithal and the facility existed beyond what you see today. And it wasn't any so-called extraterrestrial. That too was brought on by a similar group that wants to distract.
Yeah, no, and that's why I wanted to ask you about the periodic table thing, because so it's like the fifth day, animals, air, water. Animals and air are created in the fifth day, and then the sixth day, man is created supposedly, and then the seventh day, the seventh period would be like the noble gases. It would be, I guess, like perfection or perfect stability as far as elements is concerned. And I just wanted to kind of break this down, in a, I guess, allegorical or in a, elementary sense as far as man. Like, when you're looking at hydrogen, you got different hydrogen isotopes. So you got like the three types of hydrogen. One, it's the first one, and it's like deuterium and tritium or whatever. And I remember one time we had a conversation about the different types of so-called black people, and you were like, I think you said you got the blue black, the green black, and the red black. And I was wondering, like, oh, is this the three isotopes of hydrogen? Is this like how it played out? Like, is that how it would go? As far as like the people because like you got these 7 periods in the periodic table, and things start off pretty stable with hydrogen, and then you got all these different transition metals and elements or whatever, and then you have your noble gases, and it's like stability, boom, seven periods, 7 families, and then after these 91 elements, you're getting into unstable elements and elements that don't exist in nature. So it's like the same thing. Like you have these 7 families of man or people, however you want to look at it, that are like natural, and then you come into unstable elements that are manufactured, like you said, and it's like a created family or clan as opposed to like an actual bloodline. And I was wondering, and I just wanted to know, I know it's a lot there I'm asking, but I wanted to know, like, is that relative to that? Like these 3 hydrogen isotopes, you got these, coming from the one hydrogen. Or is it the same thing as like kind of like you were telling me, like that you have the 3 different types of so-called black people, the blue black, the green black, and the red black? I think is what you said.
Right, and using black in terms of the coding of today, but just keep it in the light of original, the 3 original neutrons, if you want to use that. Nagas neutron, Nehu's 3 original neutrons. And by the way, I think one of them is deuterium. Sounds like Deuteronomy. And it just came to me when you said it. I thought of that.
Yeah.
But,
I got a question.
Yeah, from what I recall, go ahead.
No, I'm saying I got a question about that later, about the Deuteronomy thing, because like I definitely want to ask you something about that, but it's, I guess, for later. I don't want to go too far just yet.
Okay. And I don't know what level of college or high school physics or chemistry you took part in. I participated all the way up into the so-called grad level. But again, I say use that, but only as a foundation. Don't take it as its all in all. So what I recall from those places, was that the 3 that you mentioned, they're based on their neutron differences.
Yeah.
And also on their, not covalence, but their distribution. So the tritium, you could say, would be sun, I guess, in the sense that it glows in the dark, or maybe it's the moon. Maybe the moon is tritium. It glows in the dark. It's more like not the sun. So it also is used in military research because it's for the fusion purposes, I guess. And then deuterium is the most stable. It also sounds like dewey. So-called, when you think of Dewey, you think of two, you think of so-called God, like not necessarily Zeus, but Deuce.
Yeah.
And so it's the most stable, and you know that it's used in so-called heavy water and in the water that stores rods for nuclear reactors. So it has the capacity to extend, because that's what's happening with those rods. They're spent, I guess, but while they're spent, they're in a level of dormancy. So they're alive and they're not. And there's only one thing that can do that in the realm of soul, and that would be that which made the soul. And then what is just the first one? That's the protein.
Yeah.
That's the most common, and that's the natural hydrogen. That would be what you see in all eumelanin. That would be the one you see in all natural life or organic life. And that would be the first. But it would have to have come from a source. So I find that both tritium and protium either work in tandem with deuterium or they extend from deuterium. And I think that's possibly the connection between them. Between the three. I guess you could call it a trinity, in a sense.
Yeah.
And when you talk about the days, or I think it says 5th day, 6th day, 7th day, we went over the day and how that basically contradicts itself. You're using the current calendar measure of a day of 24 hours. We kind of say we've eliminated that from logical perspective. It just doesn't make sense to look at it like that in a logical way. Well, you can also start with man. You want to go through those other realms, but man, as you heard me mention in many episodes, and I'll say for those who might get offended or not recognize, when I say man, I will say, and woman is included in the family of man. So in other words, woman is man, is just a form of man, a type of man, based on her form and function, makes her a so-called woman. Someone had to add that on there in the lexicon, and this would go to all languages. They had to add that on for a particular purpose, possibly political purpose. So if I designate you, it could be political, but it could also be a form of, I wouldn't say pedalization, or whatever that term is. I wouldn't say that, but in many instances it was. I'm saying it in reference to you point out something because of its unique, or not necessarily unique, but its special purpose. And in this instance, to carry that life form. So it is man that has the capacity to carry fully forming life. That's why you would say woman, but you're still talking about man. So in that time, so-called timing of manifestation or creation of man, it would be both man and woman, which would then say, well, we're talking about more than one creation time frames, if you will, going on here. The creation of man, and man would be the first, and then there's other creations after that. Maybe the Adam is the next in line of creation. And that Adam could be one of two things. And pardon me when I say things. One of two life forms, types of life forms. Either a dual in one, or what they call superposition life form, or it could have been split. And when it was split, its nexus point or its counterpart was not ready yet, or not even in the perspective. Maybe there was a testing time to see if this would be stable alone. And so we get the language in the Bible of that man is not, it's not a good that man is alone. In between the lines, that's saying that something is not stable. A reaction is not stable. So these three together have to be balanced in order to maintain that man, that Adam. But prior to Adam, there was already man, perfected man, and then there's Adam. These are all different time frames and all different, possibly different places. So you have man, which includes man and woman, more than likely, possibly, not more than likely, but possibly in one. And we see references to this throughout. Obviously, your religions are going to make you judge. It's okay to judge, but they want you to judge in a biased way, in an emotional way, fear or hate. Well, I'm looking at something honestly. I'm going to question and find out. And then when you think of elements together, and you think of things that are unstable, is something that is both man and woman in one, a superposition. We talked about, we talked about this, you asked me a question of the burning bush and the two basically elements. You have the element represented in the bush or the tree, and then the sun, if you will, the fire, but not consuming, showing the ultimate control over the element, ergo, the creator of those elements, or at least the ultimate manipulator of them. Well, is that a manifestation, an example of the perfection that existed, and that also represents the image holder, because you're told that using the terms of the book in English, and God made man in his image, or God made them, made he them in his image. Just going by the language there, you always keep that in mind before making any final conclusion. Just going by that alone, there's code in that as well. Therefore, there had to have been more than one creation, and you see through certain periods, there's certain realms made. The so-called animal realm, were there predators? The predator realm would only have to exist after the manifestation of man and woman separately. Because that's a representation of the realm of so-called nature, the separation of that which is unified. There's no reason for anything which is unified to destroy or host upon or prey upon, which is basically itself. There's no reason for that to occur. And then that also puts into the mix the concept or the idea of a demise, of a temporary status.
And I mean, also,
which allegedly befell the Adam and the so-called Eve, or the Chana, and allegedly befell them as a result of their disobedience, so-called disobedience.
Yeah, and also saying like, let us make man in our image. At least in the English translation, I have to go back and look at it, at the grammar with the grammar. Yeah.
It does actually say that. This actually says and shows and illustrates the power of distraction, and of course the power of religion and dogma to silence people. Because why hasn't anyone stood up in any synagogue or church or mosque and said, excuse me, why does it say let us? We know plural, we know third person plural, we know what that means. So why does it say let us? And then of course you're going to get some clergy person who's more than likely an initiate to tell you, that meant that God had helpers in the form of so-called angels or whatever, seraphim, cherubim, and they assisted. And that's all they were there for. They weren't there to control. They were like silent partners. They did whatever they were told. And then when it was done, they walked away. That's what you will be told. In other words, you'll be treated like not just a child, but you'll be treated like a child who has no capacity to learn. Well, they used to say retard.
Yeah, you've also heard people say that it was the Trinity talking to itself. I've heard evangelicals saying that it was the Father, the Son, and the Spirit talking to themselves, and that was the us. And it's
So Mary's a reincarnation of herself.
It doesn't add up.
So Mary didn't at all. That's just silliness. But when you have to judge, you can just look at that logically. It doesn't make sense. So the Trinity is what? Father, Son, but then they say Holy Ghost. But wait a minute, is the female a ghost? No. So there's no Holy Ghost. There's a program, but that program is the code that people miss out on, especially since the New Testament is primarily focused on Catholic. When a Christian is a Catholic, they may not like to hear that, but yes, it's all the same. Catholics are the leaders of Christians, and they don't like that, but that's a fact. So therefore, you are pushed this code, and you're not allowed to. You are allowed to lock yourself in. You're not allowed to question this code. And the hidden code is that the so-called Holy Ghost or Spirit program is to maintain you in this ignorant state where you don't question the fact, or you don't question what is considered so-called common sense. You cannot have a Trinity without the female factor. The Holy Ghost is the program that maintains you in that realm that denies the female factor. That's the Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit. It's a program.
So that's why I think a lot of people do get caught into the Osar-Oset, system, because it does make more sense in that respect that you at least have Osar-Oset and Haru being the mother, father, and son. So, but I mean, I know it's Pan-African, so it has its problems, but it makes more sense at least than a Holy Spirit being, non-feminine. Like, how does it make sense?
The secret is in the so-called message. Don't be afraid to read it. Some people don't want to. Once they feel enlightened, they don't want to read it because they fear contamination. Don't be afraid of knowledge of books, even if it's faulty. You have to know how to look at it and not be affected by it. I'm not asking you to go look at porn, although for some it could be the equivalent of porn. It can have an effect, an imbalancing effect. That's because you still haven't given up that Sodom and Gomorrah world. You're like Lot's wife. You're looking back at the old you of your old Catholic self, or your old Christian self, and it still has hold. Well, if that's the case, then no, maybe you shouldn't read it until you are ready to read it and can read it with a mature view and sight. And when you are, look at that again and read it, and you'll hear the code is right there in front of you, because you're told that the Holy Spirit is given to these apostolic faith individuals or apostles so that they can go forth and do what? Proselytize and push the same programming over and over again. So the Holy Spirit was left with them. They were left a program, but in the form of an organic format or dogmatic format. And this was pushed upon the masses, and to this day it was used by potentates and etc. to maintain this stronghold over people, over their souls primarily, and their thinking. This will eventually crash. It's inevitable, crashing net. It has about 7 years before it completely crashes and we start to see what has been hidden. So when we look at a Trinity and what's involved in a Trinity, and it's very astute of you to have asked the questions regarding elements at the very beginning. Trinity
in the sense of elements, they're together. And you only get the third part of it, the so-called triune part of it, as a result of the two together, the so-called duality together. Does this point to types of beings that existed within the realm that were male and female all in one? Well, if there's nothing new, and there isn't anything new, you see people trying to reach that again, no different than trying to elongate a skull. Is it correct? Is it appropriate? No, because people are harming themselves. You cannot make these things. Chimeras are to be made by that which made all. You're not supposed to do that. We see what's happening. This transgenic move, nothing new.
Yeah.
So you see Noah, in a sense, in that regard. You're not supposed to be doing that. This is made naturally. So when you hear terms like, there were some examples of people who were one in all. There are various groups that were here in the realm that were actually vestigial or leftover from those, I don't want to say races, but from those people. Ionians had some left over. Some did the wrong thing with them and started worshiping them. Many groups did. They were not to be worshipped. They were just a representation of another ancient realm. Others, as I mentioned before, tried to mirror and emulate them through surgery, through alteration. And that was not the thing to do either. Everything had its purpose in its realm, and then once it's done, it's gone. The same thing, I guess, with dragons. That might have been an inorganic demise, meaning they were taken out before their time. But yeah, people dragons here.
You said it was
as far as the connection of the so-called sexes of the genders, there were a group, or was a group, of beings in the realm that were just one. And they had different names. Most of them are either wiped from so-called record of history, or you're given their names in code. You have to look at their practices to recognize, well, wait a minute. For example, they make fun of it in film, those two female initiates, who wrote that silly, misandrous movie, The Woman King. I think that was the name of this silly movie.
Yeah.
And of course, she's supposedly African, so-called African. And what does she do? It's all women, and they only use the males to mate with. That's silly. If you know anything about the true path, no true man would want to be in that kind of situation. His offspring, he knew were everything. He would not give him up to some unstable female who just wanted to feed. And definitely wouldn't sit around and allow himself to become beheaded, like some fighter. Therefore, what was happening? What was going on was you're talking about people that were one in the same, more than likely. I guess you call it a so-called hermaphrodite or so-called Baphomet, all in one. Not to be worshipped, they were just people like anybody else. Obviously so, because they're no longer.
And those people.
Science reminds that Amazon were probably male, female combined.
And like you were saying, years ago to me, that those things are buried, or those genetic traits or structures, I guess, are buried in the overall, I guess, genome, where you have some people that born with multiple heads or another arm and stuff like that. That's just different traces of what once was. And then there are some people that are hermaphrodites and stuff. It's
yeah, that happens. That actually does. This is not conjecture. This is not hyperbole, and it's definitely not so-called conspiracy. There are people, obviously there are people who lie about it. They think that, just for whatever purpose. But there are true hermaphrodites that just pop up now and then. These anomalies pop up. And just like the stereocephalic, the multiple limbs or the multiple cephalids, the multiple heads,
You find it in particular bloodline builds. For example, in certain parts of Central America, which are tied to the people who overtook Kush, or so-called India, Bharata. Those are not all the originals there. There's a small group there, they're the originals. If you notice within their group, if they haven't made it with the invaders that came later, the Brahmin type, you'll notice that they don't have these so-called birth defects. It's not a birth defect. That's what the hegemony science wants you to believe in. These are just precursors to that which was before. When you see these multi-limbed, multi-limbed so-called deities, these are real. When you see these things that are part serpent, these are not just the imagination. No one was commissioned to create these grand statuaries and depictions of what? Depictions of that which were. These were the, I guess you could say, for some so-called demigods, so-called demons, etc. But if you look at it in the true sense, these were mortal beings. They had capacities, high intellect, obviously, many instances. Many of them they despised man, which would include man and woman. But many of them utilized man and Adam, or Adam, because I don't think they're one and the same. And they utilized them for particular purposes, whether to fight for them or just mate with. And if you apply that to so-called Genesis, now you're seeing the beguiling on a scale that goes beyond just one individual allegedly being tricked. There was no tricking going on. One had to have knowledge or forethought in order to participate in the sex act, because it's by consent. You look at the so-called New Testament and the story of Mary and the angel. That was by consent. That was the thing that was made for, like a contract. Before you say anything or do anything, you got to make sure you know what informed consent. You got to know what's going to happen, and you got to say yes from your own volition. Cannot force you, because that's all. You know what that's called. I won't say the word because I don't want to cause any problem on here, but
Yeah, no, that's the thing. That's the thing as far as the Bible is concerned. Like, they don't even use the word sex; they just use the word know. Like, he knew his wife, so sex was knowledge.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, so are these creatures, or I guess you call them creatures. Are these the men of renown and the fallen ones of Genesis?
Yeah, these are most of them that were obviously not on any so-called ark. If you look at ark as a massive thumb drive or a storage capacity for all the blueprint, et cetera, for that which needed to be removed and that which needed to be replaced here. Obviously, you're going to need people who can initiate this, and that would be those progenitors. And they would have to be around for a while, because it takes a while to do the repopulating of everything.
And there had to be, I guess, in order for the parasite to continue on, throughout these floods, there's a remnant of the parasite that's making it through that obviously wasn't part of the ark, I guess.
Obviously, and it doesn't have to exist in a physical realm. More than likely it did, and it also existed in the ethereal realm, which can come through symbols and words.
So it's just
if
you look at something, a visual of something, and this will give you some proof. It's not a correlation. But if you look at something that either brings back calls up a past memory, it can have and does have a physical effect, an actual physiological effect, so-called physiological effect that can be measured and seen, experienced, engaged, etc., and tested.
So it's just like if you go in the mirror and they say go in the mirror at 3 a.m. and say Bloody Mary or whatever. If you say, it's like a conjuring just from seeing these words or hearing this or seeing a symbol that might have made it through the flood, that can just invoke whatever that spirit is. It's like a QR code.
Correct. And I went into that before on the difference between invoking and praying. You have to invoke your connection with, as some say, the Most High, or with anything in those realms. You have to invoke, and you have to know how to invoke. That's not taught, and it shouldn't be a secret, but some see it as a secret if you recognize some of the writings. For example, I don't want to promote anyone, but for example, let's say Carl Jung. Knowledge is supposed to be protected, allegedly, but then again, you cannot protect that which is constantly expanding and growing. It eventually will meet with the individual that you are trying to block it from.
So, that kind of, I mean, I guess a couple things I want to touch on as far as that. Like, if you, because as far as the elemental sense goes, when we're talking about radioactive decay, like, when something decays, I think it's alpha decay, and I forget the other type of it. It's like 3 types of decay, but it was saying that through the radioactive decay, that an element or an atom can lose neutrons and become an isotope, or it can lose protons and just be a totally different atom altogether. And so, and it's like, I forget the word, it's like it's like a transatomic thing that's happening when there's radioactive decay. Is that what's happening with the originals? And then on the other side of that, because it's like when you have radioactive decay, it's like kind of forcing a balance in a sense. Like if something needs to decay and release energy to I guess assimilate, is the decay, I guess, necessary and a good thing for, I guess, if somebody is a graft and they have a bunch of, whether you want to call it junk DNA, or if they have a bunch of possessions and energy that shouldn't be theirs, like, is that kind of a sense of like energy release? Is that like a radioactive decay that could be beneficial? I was just trying to look at the both sides of like radioactive decay. Like if you can, because you can, if you can denature an atom and make it change just through, you know, radioactive decay on a macro scale, I guess that's happening to the originals. You know, maybe.
Does that not explain so-called creation of everything? Because according to so-called science, so-called modern science, when you think of radioactive decay, this is for everyone to you know, you can test me on this in the sense of, and I test me on it, you can see if I'm correct on this. If not, just send me a message and Taylor, and we'll do a retraction. But based on what I've read about it, which means what? Hearsay. Decay is a reflection of an unstable nucleus. What do you call it? An atomic nucleus. So over a period of time, it starts to lose its energy. And when it does, it starts to emit radiation. And this happens how? According to so-called science, you know, your studies, my studies said the same thing more than likely as everyone else's, I guess. But from what I know beyond that, I know otherwise. But according to the books, so-called books will say that this happens without any external catalyst or any external trigger. So as the atom tries to become more stable, it actually is, I guess, floating on itself in a sense. It's going backwards on itself. The more it tries to become stable, as it becomes stable, it's the snake eating itself. But they claim this is how the so-called universe is formed, how the so-called Earth is formed, allegedly. And they've actually proven this with some of the elements, but is that a correlation or is that actual proof?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's what I kind of wanted to ask as well, as far as light is concerned. Like, as an autotrophic being, are you creating light, or are you like realizing the light that's already there? Like, I guess, what is the nature of light itself? Because like, based on my studies, is like the light gets attracted, say, to a magnesium atom in a chlorophyll molecule, and that light excites the electrons in the system, and then that, that I guess is like the catalyst for producing glucose to feed the plant. And but the light never leaves or go. The light isn't being turned into anything. It's like just invigorating, and then it can be released later on. From my studies, I don't know what's the truth in that though.
There are various formats of light, and you hear the term limelight, and you can call that the false light. So it's like the unstable light that happens automatically allegedly without any trigger, but it does have a trigger, and it does have an effect or an outcome or a result. When you think of a plant accepting light or communing with light, you're taught that this is a way of transferring what? Because if light has no mass, what is it transferring? It's not transferring anything other than the energy that is embedded within the cells of that plant. The same thing with the sentient being. And it's triggering that which is already encoded. So the true communing with light will manifest in a fruition. But that which is not supposed to be, it will manifest in a decay, or not even decay, within a state of destruction, ongoing destruction. I guess a lake of fire. It will continue to break down over and over and over again, but in a slow way, very slow way, until there's no existence. Light has no existence in it, and it has no effect on it. Kind of like McDonald's hamburger. We put it in the sun, allegedly, and it stayed there for a long period of time. It had no vitality in it in the first place, and wasn't meant to be.
So the sun it has no parts in it. That doesn't even communicate back with it, is what you're saying.
Right. Exactly.
So there has to be light already within for the light to even invigorate anything.
You could say that, yeah, why not? Because even though these are elemental factors that are acting and reacting, within them, if you were to say that there's photons within them, no, there has to be that connection that is a receptor for the light in order for these actions to occur, these fruition activities or actions to occur.
Yeah, because that's what, from the studying that I've done, is like the photon supposedly excites the electrons, and then you have the electrons can get ejected, and then once they come back down, I guess, more towards the nucleus, then the photons get released. So like the photons never actually they're not like giving you energy. They're not like, it's not like the photon is actually providing energy. It's like, it's just I guess the best word I got for it right now is invigoration. Like, it's just like how you would say things like, you eat some food and the food isn't giving you energy. It's not giving you a mineral. It's just like invigorating your ability for you to create it yourself.
Mm-hmm. That makes more sense.
It's kind of like the same logic with vaccines, but vaccines are just atrocious. Like, that you get exposed to a thing and now you know how to defend yourself, kind of thing. But
vaccines explain witchcraft. The whole idea of incantations and brews and concoctions. Vaccines verify witchcraft, because if you look at a concoction,
that's within typical vaccine, it reads like a witch's book. I mentioned this on the podcast earlier on vaccine.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to the next thing I want to talk about. Because I was looking at the definition of chemistry, and they were saying like it comes from the Latin word chemia, which means infusion, and I was just thinking like as far as because I was looking into how cocaine is actually a salt, and because I was looking at somebody posted something about how cocaine and melanin have similar structure and everything, and I remember Dr. Africa saying that something along the lines of cocaine is, since it's an isolated substance, melanin is always trying to unify and make things complete. So when you take cocaine or salt or white sugar, white ashes from smoking, you take that in, that the melanin is responding and trying to bind and make this complete, because it's just the nature of melanin is to unify and harmonize everything. So like when you have this high state of energy, this high resonance that comes with melanin, that the drop off is more steep, so that you can become more addicted easier maybe because you have a more starker contrast compared to somebody else that might not have the energy to even fall from that high. And I just was looking, so I looked into cocaine, and I was just looking at the chemical structure of it, and I was like, oh, cocaine is a salt. And and so everything I know about salts is that it's an ionic bond. It's a metal and a non-metal together. And I'm sorry?
Electricity.
So any ionic bond is not going to actually harmonize in your system, like whereas like an atomic bond, if you look at it on a macro level, I guess you could look at it like some people are like personified cocaine kind of, and some people you meet them and it's an atomic bond. It's like oneness there. Whereas some marriages or connections or what have you, that's like an ionic connection or lack of connection. And
okay, so you said salt, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to make sure people know there's a difference between the salt and the sodium.
Yeah, natrium. That's why I feel like the rest of the world, they get it because they call salt natrium, and we call it salt.
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole world, because like I've had girlfriends that speak different languages, and they'd be like, this is natrium, and this is sodium chloride, this is not natrium, and they understand that's like a sleight of hand. And
right.
And I remember you were saying that these drugs, because they're isolated like this, like whether it's salt or sugar, cocaine, whatever, they open up portals in your blood. And you were saying that salt is something that like can hold things inside of you, and you can use it like I guess in another way to ward things off. But if you take it inside of you, it can hold a spirit in you.
Right. It holds water, and spirits are associated primarily with water. So-called water, but what are they associated with? Truly, it's the hydrogen.
So
the ultimate computer will be a water-based computer. And so the charged particle, that's what you're referring to. The chloride and the other one, the sodium ion and the chloride ion. That creates an electrical signal, especially on the tongue, which is a portal trigger, a portal conduit. It is used. You have many conduits within you and on you. And I talked about this before. It might have created some rift for some people. For example, the inner walls of the vagina. Pardon me, anyone? If they don't like the body part talk, the inner walls of the vagina, the clitoral matter, the prepuce, that's on the penis, and the glands. These are all, and the tongue. What else? There are areas that are not as sensitive. the eyelid, the inner part of the nostrils, nostrils. These, and if you notice with cocaine, what do people do? They put it up their nose and instantly. So these particular receptacles and conduits, if you will, they send electrical signals. When you think of most animals that use electroreception coming through those areas, nose, eyes, etc., and other parts, you too have that. And I mentioned this many moons ago rather, on this, and how you can utilize this through training. But in any case, they are utilized through and manipulated through chemicals, primarily in the food, in the water, anything that you can smell or you will subtly or overtly, because of the fact that it overworks. On the surface, those using it and putting it in your food probably don't know, but you take it to the other levels within the research labs, companies, certain levels know. And then, of course, they don't have to be upper level CEOs, etc. Many of them are on the so-called lower realm or tangible realm, meaning you can meet these people. They're on the tangible, they would have to be. You have to have people on all levels. How you maintain control, part of the controlled opposition philosophy. You have to have them on all levels. So there are those who know exactly what is what, and the fact that you're dealing with chemistry, in a sense, on every level. That which causes reactions and actions with you, that which incites or has a time frame on it. For example, between 30 seconds and 3 hours. Those are allegedly the amount of time that your shields are down when you ingest certain types of chemicals, such as certain sweeteners, so-called sugar. And they target your eternity / quasi-infinity. Those are two different things. And that's in your iron. So they're going to eat at your iron. Parasites eat at your iron. They want your eternity. They have access to your memory. They have access to your potential in the future. So they go for that. They go for the iron. And that's primarily in the bone blood that comes from bone, the marrow, and the osteo with the flat and other so-called bone cells. They go for that iron primarily. And then they go for the glial of the brain. They go for that. They go for leptin. They go for myelin. These are the realms of your connection to now and true knowledge, true self. When these things are blocked by your own activities or your ignorance, all the same. Your actions or your ignorance, both the same because the results are the same. You are enslaving yourself or being part of an enslaving system.
So salt is like witchcraft to trap a spirit in a body, and then that could just totally just keep you on a course that you weren't even supposed to be on.
You know, one of the purposes of so-called witchcraft is to use those spirit traps and in vessels, or to transfer spirit into vessels. You've heard of zombies. You're given this deliberate propagandized colonial version of zombies, deliberately to throw you off. But zombie, which many groups of the so-called Shemite, Canaanite, Nick utilize if you go to certain parts of the realm on the so-called islands. Not so much in so-called parts of so-called South Africa. They have these types of practices. The Chitauri are supposedly intellect walk-ins, so they deliberately allow these spirits to come in them And these are not just any spirits. These are high intellect spirits, someone called demons. And they live out their lives with these. But a witch will utilize a vessel for that purpose. So that's one of the purposes of witchcraft, to take over vessels through influence, but primarily through chemistry.
Yeah.
When you hear the lines in Macbeth, those are chemical potions, chemical formulas. On the surface, it just sounds like someone defiling and abusing animals and using things out of old wives' tales, etc. But those are chemical formulas, and they do, in addition to their like an elemental table, something has a twin, etc. Well, they will use its etheric twin or ethereal twin to seal the deal. You have the physical elements or the manifestation in the physical of elements, and then you have the connection with those elements. You put that together in a particular order, in a particular amount, and you get it into a sentient, and then you can get whatever your will done. No different than what you do when you go to the supermarket and you buy Ritz crackers. The spells are there, and they put it on the side of the box.
So that, like, when you were talking about iron, another thing I was looking about iron is that iron as the isotope iron 56 is supposedly the most stable of all the elements, and based on like what I know about melanin itself, it is similar to chlorophyll, where it's like 4 nitrogen atoms that are like 4 corners and there's an iron atom in the middle of them, and it's like the same thing as chlorophyll, where it's like a magnetic center that's attracting photons, I guess, and then so if we're looking at, that's the structure of melanin, is the iron atom is at the center of it. The parasite is just after. The melanin is the source of the eternity. That's like you were saying, like the blood or the iron. Because as far as the blood is concerned, hemoglobin or heme is basically just melanin, right? It's just the color of that's what gives the blood the purple that eventually looks red once it's diluted. But like that's the melanin is the heme or in the blood, and that's what's attracting
the blood. Correct.
Yeah.
That's your connection to eternity through so-called memories, and then of course beyond the memories to your core. And then of course I mentioned the bones because of the marrow, and you're told that the marrow is the center or the manufacturer, pardon the term, of your blood cells. And this has been proven and shown, okay, and it is. And they are. But where does that iron go? Because it doesn't just stay in the bone, obviously. It goes out, it's distributed. So it is first and foremost in your hemoglobin, or as you said, the blood. And then it goes into your muscle, your myoglobin. And then it goes into your storage zone, your ferritin, your ferritin and your transfer. It goes into the iron storage and transport that occurs with your protein transport. And then it is distributed in order of the 9 principles within the organ. And so if you were to add it up, you'll get the 9 principles, or some call them I should know this. I do, but right now I'm fading. But the 9, not the duat, but the so-called Egyptian thing of the so-called Egyptian, and they represented it, and the reasons why things are taken into an order in the canopic jarring grid or so-called system. We put certain things in particular jars that were protected by particular so-called entities. Well, you would start with the distribution with the liver and its lobes, then the spleen, and then back against the bone marrow, but not in the bone structure. Keep that in mind, the bone structure. So most don't realize that your organs, so-called organs, have lobes, like your brain has lobes, your liver has lobes, your pancreas has lobes, so-called lobes. They're different areas, and they have different names. But the names that, if you notice them, most of them are so-called netters or gods. So they're telling you something within you. When you're put together by a group, and then you were approved of by one. You had to go through that one and, okay, this is good, and this is not. This is not ready yet. Put this back or get rid of it. Somebody was doing what's that woman's name who stole radioactive material? Sherwood, what was her name? I forget the woman's name. It wasn't Sherwood, but someone was doing something like that, stealing materials from the factory and bringing it somewhere. So they were doing that with the making of beings, sentient. Was it an angel, so-called angel? Probably, possibly. What you call so-called angel, but that goes beyond the scope of what you are taught today in your religions and your books on such topics. I don't think people could fathom an angel. What you see presented as an angel is not what the actual description says. If you look at the description, it resembles something out of something Faustian or something from what was that character's name who wrote the Necronomicon? It resembles one of those things.
You said Necronomicon? Something dead?
Well, that was the name of the so-called book. They renamed it from, it came from the stolen book, and of course it presented as fiction. I'm trying to remember the so-called author's name. He didn't write it, but he got a hold of it as a result of purchasing things after the fall of, during the fall of the so-called Ottoman Empire. A lot of things left open that they had stolen from the realms of the three patriarch bloodlines, and these things are just floating around. Today, they're in someone's home somewhere or skirted away into some museum. But that book was then called the Necronomicon. It could be the Book of the Dead. But this book had references to all of the so-called fallen ones and their names and what they look like and the descriptions, kind of like what Solomon had access to, possibly what Solomon wrote, and also what allegedly John Dee had access to.
So if you could compare...
And what was revealed to so-called King James.
In demonology.
Mm-hmm, correct.
So if you could... So that's why Asmodeus had three heads and different parts from different animals and all that type of stuff. So that's what we're looking at. Something like that. Mm-hmm. Something like that walking around. Actually walking around that you could talk to.
Mm-hmm. So people aren't ready for that. So they portray them in the cretinism format, which is the ignorantising, the idiocy format, because it's very childlike. And then, of course, it's very vain. So you have to present them in this format that looks like some chubby Laplander female or baby with wings, and that's far from what they obviously look like, just based on the description given in various books. They don't look like that. And many people who literally froze and just by seeing the countenance of these beings.
Yeah, I mean, if you ran into something like that.
Froze. I don't mean froze in fear. I mean, they literally just were off. They were gone. Heart stopped, gone. Taken to another wherever realm. But they were gone. Just seeing something like that. No one has people get shocked just by the things they see in everyday life. Imagine seeing something of that caliber.
You have to have your nervous system. Yeah, your nervous system has to be
right,
in order.
Exactly. You will fry your entire nervous system.
I think your mic went out again. Damn, you're still in there though.
Pardon me, I let the screen go off. Keep my finger near the buzzer. In terms of, I'll close in this on the melanin and iron. I think that was what you meant, iron 56 in particular.
Yeah.
Again, the distribution. Keep in mind the distribution. Everything has a hierarchy. Well, the same thing goes for the next in line would be the eumelanin, and that's, you know what that is. You see it in the pigment of certain sentients. Not everyone has it. So you see it in the skin, you see it in the hair, you see it in the eyes, and of course you don't see it in the brain, but that's where it's at primarily. And this contains these are the binding, the metal binding sites. And one of the main metals that it can bind is iron. This one, and of course copper, zinc, etc. So on. But one of the main metals that is bound within eumelanin is iron. And iron, as I mentioned before, is your conduit to eternity and infinity. And those are not the same thing.
I was gonna ask you what the difference is between neuromelanin and dopamelanin, because I guess everything, from my understanding, everything is skin. Like your eyes are skin, your organs are just a different pattern of skin. Like you said, the distribution, I guess, of the atoms kind of creates a different pattern, and that creates a different texture or different density of skin. And that be whether it be a kidney skin or liver skin or the skin on the top. Like why is dopamelanin different than neuromelanin or something? What makes it different?
Its purpose and its function. Everything has a function and purpose. So if you recognize that, you respect it obviously, but you recognize that it has its purpose. You are to find out what a purpose is and to be part of that structure when you're carrying out such things as meditating or consumption of something. So you don't physically stop or start a process, but you can help amplify it if necessary, or work with it and know it.
And as far as the iron thing is concerned, we were talking about quantum position earlier, and I was looking in, because some physicists, they were saying that electrons don't actually spin. The electrons have a wave particle duality, and it's not orbiting like how you would see I guess the classical indoctrination that we have. It's they call it an electron cloud. So I was wondering the structure of the iron, is this a little miniature heaven? I don't know if you want to say heaven, but little miniature cosmos, inside each atom. That's like an electron cloud, or I don't know. Is the proton making a cloud? Are they all? Because they're all supposedly in the indoctrination. They're orbiting the nucleus, but is it just a cloud that just like a neural net type thing, because you can't really predict where the electron's going to be. It could be anywhere based on your observation, I guess. And so depending on how what your premise is when you're interfacing with it is going to determine I guess how that gets communicated back to you, its location, or what the nature of the electron is, or the nature of the proton, the neutron that's making up this iron atom that is this conduit to eternity. And I was just wondering what is the actual structure of this iron, because we've been given these images, like kind of the same way we've been given an image for COVID or whatever. Like, this is what the virus looks like. This is what an atom looks like. This is what, and I think it's kind of the same thing, like with people, like, we don't really, for the most part, people don't know what original people look like. They don't know what an atom looks like. So I just was wondering, like, what is the nature?
Well, we do have access to original people. That's for sure. What is occurring in this particular realm is the defiling of the original people and the disappearing of original people. But we know what they look like. We have description, and we see them in the Americas, in the U.S. You call them so-called black people, not to be confused with other groups of people that are also under that so-called monolithic misnomer, because they're not all the same. That's the danger of it. No differently than so-called white people under that so-called monolithic misnomer are the same. It's done for the purpose of confusion. You notice it's white and black. What about all these other groups? No one else will. You don't say, okay, hey, I'm yellow. Where's that? Where's the yellow lives matter? Because these individuals know in this realm, at least those who are thinking, truly thinking, they recognize in this realm, you're going to have to take sides with the structure, the duality structure. And you're going to have to take second fiddle if you're not that group. So you might be so-called Asian. Again, if you look at your true history, you start to realize, okay, wait, my people aren't from here either. They are doing the same thing as these so-called white people did. But at the same time, you're still buying into the hegemony, and therefore you can't be white because of your physical appearance and because of your blood makeup. You trace your roots to so-called Africa, so therefore you can't be white. But what does that mean? You have to accept the duality of the hegemony of the so-called status quo, and that would mean you have to be either in the stands cheering them on or the water boy, but you can't be them. You can't be the quarterback. And then what else is that? And that's the other side, the flip side. So you've got white, black. Black would represent all that is evil, bad, corrupt, dirty, devilish, etc., etc. This is the nature of a duality. You've got good, you've got bad, you've got right, you've got left. You've got God, you've got the devil. And they have to maintain this type of spin. If you create an actual spin, it creates a torsion field in itself. And then all those within it get caught up in it.
So how would someone...
That's why you have the black and white floors in those temples that are basically conduit structures. They know exactly what those structures are for. These temples are miniature versions of Solomon's temple in a sense, and one of the vestiges is the vestigial leftovers are the pillar structure, the Kabbalistic Yoni lingam system within, the Holy of Holies in the middle, and then, of course, the spin that is created by the black-white portion of it all. And this all ties into your elements, too, because these things have an effect on elements. But you have to maintain this duality structure. And as I said before, you look at the people who call themselves black, they are not black. We're going by what? We're going by shade, we're going by so-called color, spectrum, light spectrum. They're not black, no more than the people who call themselves white are white. So you're living a lie if you use these terms and then become lazy and complacent by saying, for lack of a better term, we'll just say this. No, when are you going to stop having this lack? When are you going to start saying, okay, I'm creative, I'm independent in my thought, I'm going to come up with a true word. I'm not going to make up one, but I'm going to come up with something that is true and relates to my bloodline and my connection to that. And I have to first find out exactly what my connections are and not be afraid. You are ruled through your emotions and by your emotions. So you're not going to allow anyone to do that, especially yourself.
So how does...
You truly are true, and you want to see this place not be what it is being led to then you are the one. And that means every single one of you are the one to do it. And that will end all of these isms. You know, there's no purpose for feminism when you recognize where you all come from. This will put an end to a lot of religions too. Because you recognize, oh wait, there's no such thing as a thing called a Trinity, and this Trinity is a manifestation of a lie. The hidden female form is gone because someone decided not to have it there, which has a resounding residual effect on everyone. Then you get rid of the feminism, which is just as bad as offshoot of it. The feminism is the secular version of the Trinity. It's the misandrist version. It's saying that, okay, all we need is females, we don't need men. Unless the male is either, going to kill his masculinity within it, the Kali principle. He's going to self-castrate, then he's okay. So these things are not necessary, and everyone is just basically violating the hierarchy of elements, of nature, of universal law, and that which has been put here by the originator, creator, the creator, originator, by what you call God, by the Eloha, or Aloha, or Elohim altogether, but it's in violation of that which is structured and hierarchical.
So
violation has its own rewards, if you will, and we see these things every day. One of them is a loss of your longevity.
Yeah. How does one tell the difference? Because for a lot of people, they just, like you said, it's like a sweeping statement, like, oh, this is black, all these people are black. Like you were showing me the other day, I had seen some videos where people were saying that Ethiopians are Edom, and you showed me a woman the other night, and I would have never guessed that that she would have been an Edomite, but you were saying like this woman right here, this is what the original, I guess, format of the Edomites would be. And or like closer to, and this is a melanated group. This is not somebody like, I guess like the Nation of Islam would have you think that this is just a bunch of gingers, like Ashkenazi gingers or something. That's not what the Edomite is. And so it's like,
no, not at all.
So a lot of people might be like, look at a black person, or so-called black person, and say, like, oh, this is original or whatever, and they don't know, like, Edomite is still like Jacob's brother, so it would still be a Shemite, but it's a lot of differences as far as...
The differences are internal, and these are whether these are allegorical tales or these are concentrated, condensed versions of something larger scale, one person representing a group. Whether that's the case or not, what we are to conclude is that a lot of what we don't see is what we do see. So factions, ideologies, grudges, etc., all carried within. And just imagine if someone who has a lifelong grudge against you based on the indoctrination they receive from all their input stimuli, parents, etc., religion, but they look similar to you. You have no idea that this person has vowed to be your enemy, but they look almost like you, but they're not you. Various things can occur and do. You can mate with them, and then now you have the enemy in your household through your own bloodline, or you can let down your guard and things happen that way too. So this is what you see going on. The purpose is to do that, and when you create these false dual systems, this is what happens.
Well,
people gather together. Yeah, you can see. Well, for example, the so-called whiteness, which is actually parasitic, as you know, that all parasites that have to have a host are either white or translucent. When so-called Ben Franklin, and I'll tell you his name one day, that's not his name. When so-called Ben Franklin allegedly wrote that letter stating that the so-called white race or group is a small group and that it is being outnumbered and should stop the importing of these groups out of Europe because they are not white. meaning, and he mentioned them. He said Swede, he said German, Italian. He's naming all the people that are not white, which today are calling themselves white.
Yeah, and
mixing with is eliminating the true whiteness. So what exactly was Ben Franklin? He was a parrot.
He didn't even want them speaking German. He's like, everybody should be speaking English. We don't want to we don't want to be Germanized. We don't want to be whatever, Italianized. We want to be Anglified everything. We don't want to speak that language, and even have any tie to that. I mean, it's important in the Bible. In Daniel in 2:43, it says iron can't mix with clay. And so you got all these different types of people, and iron again being the eternity element. It's like you got all these different types of people that don't know who they are, or some do, and they use it, nefariously. But it's really important. I think people really don't give it the respect that it deserves, and then it's like a lot of sweeping statements that ultimately cause the problems that we're in today, where you have, like you said, you have people in your house that are not from the same nation, but they might have a similar shade, or certain features might be similar, but it's like a totally different species almost of person.
But one thing you notice across the board is what the annihilation of melanin, the attack on melanin,
for sure.
Whether it's with oneself or against others, and that tells you, you can call it. I'm just going to name it Ben Franklin from here on. The Ben Franklinitis, which is parasitism, parasite. Parasite is like something out of the Bible, parasite, jubicite. It sounds like something from there, but in any case. He was a walking parasite. And so from his group, his ilk, his so-called cohort, you have parasites. And if they are blending in with groups that are similar to them, then now you are spreading those parasites. You are killing them by spreading that SLP1485 and other things that destroy melanin in order to do what? To manifest more parasites.
Yeah, and
you know them when you see them, you know them when you sense them, but you blind yourself to it, and you just chalk it off to someone's coldness or someone's upbringing. No, they're not the same. He pointed that out, and that's why he wanted a stop on the certain types of people coming out of Europe, and he even mentioned what type of people were in the Americas, which puts to rest the whole concept of so-called Native Americans being these so-called Mongol / Latino / whatever, a mix of mestizo people. They're not the originals. Most of their higher up, so-called upper echelons in their chiefdoms, they know that. And they know that before them were original people, and we call them so-called Negroid people. They were here in the Americas. Prior to those others that you can classify as indigenous, but they're not, and they know this. And those that came in and colonized this, they know this too. Hence the reason why they find it so easy to colonize, and then they put forth this narrative that everyone buys. And I've already gone into the whole so-called transatlantic slave trade logistically from every point of view, in the sense of business sense, marketing, you name it. The whole concept of plantations doesn't make sense to bring people from a great distance across that type of water system. Stretch of water, violent water, and then bring them into a land where they have no idea, don't speak the language, and you're going to give them orders. I don't think so. I've already went through that. So using your logic, which you might call basic sense, or so-called common sense, you should recognize that it doesn't make sense. And neither do all of these actual anti-life chemical, anti-neutron setup, because it's going against the very basic unit, the hierarchy. When you deal in all these isms, when you allow those isms to be part of your framework and your makeup, know who you are. If you don't know, find out who you are. Dig deeper than just what your relatives tell you, and don't be afraid of what you find.
Yeah, Is that what brought the lifespan down? Crossbreeding with the graft? Because like you were saying the last time we spoke that the grafts, the slaves, were not supposed to live a certain length and time. And I remember you also saying that some people that they have people in the basements or like in the lower levels of the Vatican that are designed to live hundreds of years, and they just read and read and read and read, and they just like basically outlets to to give somebody information if they want it or whatever, because they're just there designed to do that. But I as far as like the graft only designed to live, I don't know how many years they're.
Yeah, it had a purpose. The purpose would be to serve like a utility. And then when the utility if it expired, had an expiration date on it, you'd get some more. The so-called white group or racial groups within these realms, most of them have that lineage within them. And this is what's not taught but told. So you have to ask, well, who was enslaving them? Who made them? You can point to certain groups of so-called black people who ran the planet. Just like a hegemony is today, they had the hegemony then. And they manifested these beings for various purposes. One, they had a higher directive not to kill one another, because if you did, you went against the realms higher than you. So how could you kill someone who looks like you? You create something that doesn't look like you, and then you stick them on them. And say, okay, go kill this Nigger or Nigga, who I don't like. But now you don't have to do that. They just do it themselves to one another. But then they manifested or manufactured what you call so-called white races, many different types, in order to carry out not just slave duties, but also to fight. Obviously males, and they had a particular lifespan, a short lifespan. It's kind of like playing where you get the whole concept of chess. You move the chess pieces here and there, but what happens in chess, the pale piece moves first. People see that as, that was racist, but no, who's controlling the board? This board game was played by so-called melanated people. You can't look at history the way you've been taught it, because you can, but you'll be stuck in a loop. You look at it and find out, you'll see a lot of things. A lot of things are left over. The vestiges, the vestigial things, or the remaining things in the artifacts, as I mentioned it many times, in the artwork, you'll see the clues right there before you, such as Europe, which is named after a so-called black goddess. So-called black goddess. I say so-called, obviously, I don't mean black, but I mean of a dark ebony, so-called Negroid bloodline. That is where Europe came from, Europa. And it's also a so-called constellation, Europa. Or it's actually a moon, I believe, of one of the so-called planets. But how would you know this unless you could see it? And also, these various, not just the names of places, which have been changed, but also some of the practices that still remain to this day tell you that this place was originated originally by Negro, so-called Negroid groups, saying so-called. And many of them violated hierarchical principles, obviously so. And went into places and took over places and invaded places they weren't. You see this in the Book of Remembrance, also called so-called Bible, and other historical things that are allowed to be out or haven't been sequestered. You'll see these connections.
So if you live 969 years or whatever, like Adam or Methuselah or something, and then you breed with a graft, then you could end up, your offspring might only live 300 years or something, and then
or less, but more than likely they wouldn't. But who knows what their offspring would have done? But I think that their main progenitors, for the most part, don't sound like, logically speaking, that they would do something like that. And I don't think that many of these manufactured beings, which you would call so-called white people today, can't say Caucasians, because if you study the history of Caucasia and so-called Caucasians, they were so-called black people. Same with Khazarians. They were so-called black too. All of these groups, the Ashkenazi groups, they are all so-called black. So how did they turn pale? You're talking about chemistry. You're talking about mutanism. You're talking about takeovers and colonizing and then identity theft.
And then it's just the world over. It's identity theft the world over, and so we all don't. So nobody knows who they are, or some people do, but a lot of people don't. And that's
correct.
Yeah.
That's the discombobulation that I mentioned before.
So
or the confusion of faces, as it said in the Bible, confusion of faces, and that is also the problem. And it becomes, as you mentioned, a macro-micro scale, because just imagine in all so-called bloodlines, and well, not bloodlines, but all so-called racial separation and difference divide. In that in itself, it might be a so-called saving grace to a degree, in that, let's say you have been told you're white and you're so-called Italian, which you're probably not, but just to say that's what they claim you are. And they claim that your family tells you that your ancestors came over around the early 1900s on both sides. Okay, so that both of them came over, and obviously one met the other, and then they had you. Okay, well, that means you have to have cousins here, et cetera, all breeding within the same group, because you want to maintain that culture perspective, but you also want to maintain that so-called phenotype connection, et cetera, and anything else that might go with your so-called phenotype within that hegemony or in that so-called society. Obviously, paleness. You're taught that if you're pale, you're going to thrive. If you're not, you're not going to thrive. So do your best to maintain that paleness, or if you don't have it, breed it out. So what happens along those lovely trails of breeding, there's going to be some inbreeding going on, because you don't know who you truly are. You might be meeting someone, and you know how people are in terms of the so-called gender, males and females. Males have many different females. That's just a given. I'm not taking any feminist side, because that's just wrong. That's what males do. Males are designed for all men. So yes, they might have many females, and which comes with that many children. And now you're dealing on a different level, a different scale, and in villages and small towns and big cities, you might be mating with your half.
Yeah, I mean, like Benjamin Franklin said, it's a small group of people that are pale, and in the world over, people that are so-called white, I think the percentage is like between 6 and 12% or something like that. So like,
very small.
Yeah, so if you stay in that pocket, the chances are extraordinarily high, especially as the generations go on. It's not like it's the first generation, but and I guess on the other side of it, it's just, it can happen with delinquency, as far as melanated fathers not having the footing in the world and having many different women maybe in a town, and then they skip town, and then you have children that have like an affinity or a gravitation toward each other, and they just confuse that with love, and then you have inbreeding in that way. Well,
not all groups. This is the thing about hegemonies and putting people all together in clusters where you have all various types. Eventually, you're going to have a mix of activities and things that are accepted and acceptable, so-called cultural. In the so-called Aboriginal original culture, the messed up ones, just to be facetious, they didn't practice that for the most part. And if you did have multiple wives, it was on a hierarchical level, scale, where you respected the fact that, and you were bringing someone into your family, and this was extending your family. So you played by rules, and those rules were set within your group, and the female who was your your main spouse, she also set many of those rules because, hey, you're bringing another female in. So it wasn't this rampant, which many people say, oh, melanated males, they just rampantly breed. Like, no. Rampant breeding came from people who were usually on the slave side or their masters.
Up until civil rights, there was more delinquency in the white household, so-called white household, than the so-called black household. So you had more. I think the Great Depression, even you had more so-called black families intact than white families, so-called white families, and so I think that's the nature to be more conservative in that respect. As far as melanated peoples, is just I guess through the rape of slavery and or so-called slavery. I don't want to call it transatlantic, but I guess some slavery did happen. But through that,
definitely more of a land theft, and also warring, losing land to not only so-called proxy Europeans, aka so-called whites, but also losing land to the people that might have had melanin too, so-called melanin too. Take, for example, and this is just an example, I'm not calling anyone out, but look at Kamala Harris. She has admitted that her family is slave owners.
Yeah.
Enslavers was the word, not slave owners, enslavers. So that meant she was enslaving indigenous people. Her family was. So she is, by an extension, part of them. And she came from where? Jamaica and India. So on both sides of her family, she has what you call conqueror blood or invader blood. And there are many so-called melanated people who have invader, conqueror blood in them. And they're living right next door to the people that they harmed, their ancestors harmed. But you would know it because you abide by the rules of racism. Like, oh, they're just black. No, they're not the same. So you have this push. In fact, the push to go back to so-called Africa, which actually that's incorrect. There's no back to a place where you're not from. But that push was started by so-called Jewish people, so-called white people. Jewish is not a race, but so-called white in the 18th century. And I mentioned this before. In conjunction with their co-conspirators or confederates from Western Africa. And you wonder, well, wait a minute, you're giving the illusion and the picture of people walking around with loincloths. No, West Africans are more highly evolved than any so-called white, and had cities, etc., which whites came to, so-called whites came to. And so these so-called groups, like the Homie, etc., I'll just name a few of them, Songhai, they were going back and forth to Europe, going to school, sending their kids there, and coming to the Americas, slumming basically in the Americas.
I mean, Mansa Musa had the most gold on earth, supposedly, at one point, right? I mean, he's West African.
Yeah, allegedly was the most wealthiest man in history. And I mean, that's not, if he did in fact exist, it's not a far-fetched or any stretch or any imagination, considering all the land wealth and resource wealth out of Africa. No, it's no myth. But at the same time, you can read about these men. Their names are given. They're like a society of them. They lasted all the way into the 20th century. Names are very infamous. And they created Pan-Africanism. The purpose of removing the Aboriginal or the original, the Shemite, out of the Americas and into, again, the hands of their captors. Saying, hey, you're from Africa. Here, we're going to set up Liberia for you and send you there. Look at Liberia. Why is this constant clashing? They're not from Africa. For the most part, they're not from there. They might have been through there like they've been through Europe and Asia as a result. So you look at the Book of Remembrance and you see where the Israelites went through and now where they are today and stretched around the world.
So where can people repatriate to? Like if you are pale or whatever. Like I remember one time you were telling me that me being a chimera, that I just have to stay moving. Like I can have like seasons in certain places and just got to keep moving. But like if somebody is there even a place for pale people? Like, is it just West? Is it just West Asia, or is it just Ukraine? Like, where is there even a place for them to repatriate to, or does everything just have to reset and they have to stop breeding and life just has to take itself out that way?
Well, it's amazing you mentioned the Ukraine. That's probably one of the reasons why it was set up as a place for them to come to, because Ukraine is basically worshipped by those who classify themselves as white. And it's a fact. And for those who know, rather, those who don't know, they don't know this. But it is considered a holy place. And for the so-called Russians to allegedly have attacked it, and then this is not the first time these things have happened. But if you see the audacity of a former comedian turned so-called leader, president, prime minister, whatever, to come forward and demand of the so-called U.S. president, you're going to do this, and I don't want to take no for an answer, makes you wonder, what kind of stage are we on? This is the stage, as Shakespeare said. But this man, former comedian, what does he have that you or anyone else, me or anyone on the street doesn't? How can he be leader? Are people that stupid that they only go by popularity and allegedly put him in office? This should verify to you the puppetry that's happening and has been going on. A comedian, what does he know about fiscal policy? What does he know about strategy, war strategy, et cetera, et cetera? Was he some Mensa candidate and comedian?
No.
No. But yet here he is, because he knows one thing, and that's the hidden history of Ukraine and what it was there for, what it was set up for. It was set up for so-called white when they were out of slavery, put out to pasture or couldn't be utilized anymore by the original Russians. You study the history of Russians, you find out they are not what you see today. And you hear these terms, Black Russian, and someone will say, oh, this has nothing to do with blackness. It's always black. It has to do with how do you say, the nobility. No, it's the same thing when they say black nobility. They're not referring to someone's so-called nefarious mindset. No, black nobility was referring to the original nobility of Europe. Russia is also Europe. It's the connection between so-called Asia and Europe. And there really is no Europe. Europe is a colony of the Kushites and some Shemites. And it is all so-called Asia.
So
and it's Africa, it's all Asia. It's actually Kush 1, Kush 2. It's a large group.
So Ukraine is just Ukraine was a place for spent slaves. So did every kingdom have a place like that?
Yeah, most of them did. And if you were renegade, they shipped you out to the hills where there were caves, and where we get terms like troglodyte, etc. You were shipped out to those places, and eventually, it was a dumb move. We see this in art. One of the most popular tapestries or artwork is the Attack of the Wild Men. And if you look at it, you see these so-called black, not necessarily Negroid, but probably some type of Moor, which is still a so-called Negroid bloodline or Shemitic bloodline, in these castles fighting off what? Gingers, so-called gingers, wrapped in what looked like costumes, or not costumes, like they had been tarred and feathered. Camouflage, and they're attacking these castles that have so-called melanated men and women in them in refined clothing, as in saying these are the owners of the castle and the land being overrun by these wild people. And this is around the so-called 8th or 9th century. So you had to take over by what are termed so-called barbarian factions or clans, incrementally, and the breakdown of Edom or so-called Rome through the same type of stacking. You know how what stacking does? That's it. You don't want to stack the heart of the game. That's your quarterback. So you stack all of these places, and Edom was one of the main centers for so-called melanated empire or hegemony. That meant that those in the Americas, because in the Americas they were mixing with a lot of the so-called black Europeans that were coming over here, setting up vacation homes, et cetera, et cetera. All the buildings that you see and were told were built by so-called white people out of Europe, which were not, just came in and took over the places, empty places. Did a little touch up here and there, but for the most part, these cities were empty after the warring between these melanated factions, and then of course their pale slaves that they were working with. Spain is known for that. Iberia and Spain, they were mixing with their albinos, they were mixing with their slaves. They weren't supposed to be doing that, but they were. For many reasons, you don't do that. Why would you? There's a level of just below.
Damn, you cut out. Oh, you cut out.
When you violate sexually someone who has no control over their rights or their movement in the world, that is a violation. It's a big violation. So, for example, a teacher messing with a student, that's not consensual. So when they were doing this with their slaves, this is a violation of that as well. And then, of course, a violation of bloodline. Hence the reason how you get the various levels of so-called rooms, opulence, this room, that room, mulatto, etc. This is where you get this breakdown in casteism. And then I mentioned so-called Iberia. They practiced this when they came over into the Americas. They just brought over the same system, but they didn't make this up. This came out of so-called Black Europe, as sanctioned by their spiritual leader, the Pope. And the popes are so-called black.
So, yeah, I mean, so was Canada the place for the Americas, where they would put when you would put when your slave, you're sending them off to pasture, when they bonded out, when they spend enough years being a slave, you kick them out to Canada? Is that where they go, or the southern?
Well, in the Americas, I don't know if they practice similar systems, because here, the Americas is the unique body of land, in that you've got water on both sides. It's perfect. It's like a castle with a huge moat. It's prime real estate. And so there was no need to ship anyone anywhere. And we don't really have cold regions other than, going into cold Canada. But then they would be able to go back into Siberia if we did that. So it wouldn't be strategic to do such. However, if you were to bring them down into places like Patagonia, now that would make more sense, and they did. So you're thinking coming from the north, well, the attack came from the south.
So you're saying they put them down there in glacial Argentina?
Yeah, it would make more sense to put people there, and they did. They did put people there. That entire society, which is hidden from history, they don't tell you about, the Pampas, the areas of what they call the Pampas area, where we get the gaucho. If you know what a real gaucho looks like, that's a dark, extremely dark, darker than the original Arab dark, so-called cowboy. We call them so-called gauchos. But then all of a sudden, you get the turning, and now they're pale. They are not the same people. The whole area is a mix of ex-slaves coming in shipped over from Spain, shipped over from Italy, shipped over from Asturias, all coming into so-called Argentina and Chile, and just basically taking it over from the south. And the same thing happened in droves in the 1900s, late 1800s, into North America. We've got images, we've got videos, you've got old reels, you see them coming in, and you're taught these lies about, they were coming in for a better life. That's not the case. They needed bodies, and primarily bodies to take over a lot of these empty places, and then of course to create the caste system. The only place where you had a large amount of the remnant was in the southeast, and then they got pushed out of the southeast. The creation of the so-called clan was to, basically like cattle herding, to push the originals into pockets, and then what became so-called ghettos today, so-called reservations, but actual reservations, they call them ghettos.
And that's why you said
But the ghettos.
The clan outfit is the Catholic garb.
Correct, exactly. It's a capriot. You see, and that's a particular so-called brotherhood or faction or clan. It's a primary Catholic system in the sense of after the with the introspection, after the there's a term for it. Begins with an I. It's given a name, but it's where you torture people who were, heretics, etc., against the realm, against the church.
Inquisition?
Inquisition, that's the name it has been given. But it was based on an inquest, and so they call it the Inquisition. And you had inquisitors. These are actual titles given to people who would go around various areas and make sure you were not practicing so-called black art. What's a black art? That would be anything that was left over from, you got it,
the remnant.
Mm-hmm.
So,
correct.
So when you said we have about 7 years until the religions are folded on themselves, and then
they'll slowly start to see them implode. It's because you can only hide truth, but for so long, and eventually you have a certain amount of time before you put it out there. Like a divorce, you have to publish it, so it has to be put out there. And regardless of if it's in a small periodical somewhere, it's going to get out. And those who are immersed in it will either implode on themselves or be wise enough and resilient enough to recognize, okay, I can live without this. I can breathe without this. When you think about religions and why people, it has a hold on most people is because they feel that they can't live without it. And furthermore, the threat of living without it means you give up your ticket to so-called paradise or heaven, etc. And then you trade it in for another ticket to the opposite place. When they find out a lot of things, and it's not about belief, it's about the proof of those who have been lying all along. That would be the nail in the coffin. We've already found some things, but that didn't do much. People don't really care about the truth.
So it's going to be it'll be more concrete stuff in the next 7 years that just make people jump off that boat altogether, or just go down with it, or go down with the boat.
Exactly. You would think that hiding the Molekian treatment of children would have done it, but it showed you the fact that that's been going on for a long time within various groups, regardless of so-called race. Many groups sacrifice their children.
Are you talking about like the Epstein type stuff, or what?
It goes beyond just that, literally sacrificing, utilizing, or using, rather, abusing, misusing in every way, shape, or form. Misusing a child as innocent arrival like it's a piece of meat or worse. And this is going on in all facets of society, sanctioned by churches at the highest level and allowed by all different groups, even the so-called, and primarily the so-called philanthropic groups. Philanthropy is deviltry. You really see what's behind it, what it really truly is and means.
Oh yeah, I mean all the NGOs that get the money, like the Catholic NGOs, that they ran all of the human trafficking scheme to get, they were doing all of the child trafficking and human trafficking in general on the border. The Catholic charities.
Correct. And only this time, all those who are involved. In the past, usually the females find a way to get out of it. That Sappho's spirit, that Jezebel spirit, is not going to protect them this time. So they'll get it too. And a lot of women, almost on the equal scale, have been participants in this. They won't be impervious to it like before. Typically, when you look at things a long time over so-called history, only the males end up getting literally the act. But in this instance, they're female cohorts, they're female, we call it their people who are complicit with others. They will also be right along. Whether the so-called justice system, now that too is going to have flaws. There's going to be a domino effect because of your so-called justice system, which would include judges, prosecutors, etc. That's also going to have to fall too, because they're part conspirators as well, co-conspirators, confederate with it, and they have maintained the hegemony as well, and primarily breaking up families. So they're going to be part of it too. You know, it takes judges to sign orders to separate children from families, and put them in a vulnerable situation.
So it's like, I guess that was one thing I kind of wanted to ask. In the last one we were talking about, well, like just in general with law, like is the whole structure, like the original structure, but like kind of just like, I guess adulterated, like with like as far as like you got the Supreme Court, they all wear black, and then the whole system is this Constitution, the American Constitution, because they say it's the best Constitution in the world or whatever. Was that like a remnant? Was there big parts of that like a remnant of the original system that was there?
Yeah, it's definitely plagiarism. The so-called drafters didn't draft anything. They just basically took that from the information and documentation from the confederacies that existed here before they took over, because it wasn't a matter of them arriving and then growing. No, these are terrorists. These are ex-slaves, or the second generation, first generation of slaves, who basically took over and then plagiarized all of this documentation, and then, of course, put themselves in position. This person is going to now be the president. This person is going to be the treasurer.
Because it doesn't make sense. Like with James Madison, all them, they're like in their 20s, and some of this stuff in the Constitution is like, damn, this guy would know this in his 20s already. Like
exactly.
It just doesn't make sense. I don't know. As far as like, if you've just been living in a tough environment and going through war, Revolutionary War, when did you have the time to study this stuff to where you would know law and all of it? Like you just studied the Magna Carta and all of this. When did you have the time? None of it makes sense. But
you're spoon-fed this and supposed to take it in and hold it to heart and believe it. And this is what has happened. Obviously, it has been believed, and it becomes part of your firmware, if you will, when you take this in. Hence the reason why it is pushed on you in your formative years, deliberately, and then of course maintained over and over and over again. So you don't question it, and you start to even honor it to a degree. But yeah, if you look at it in its true sense, you'll see that it makes no sense. And obviously these are lies. This Constitution is a plagiarization of the actual Confederacy documents that were set forth by the nations that were already here. And the so-called presidents that came before Washington. And I mentioned, of course, the apotheosis. You see the handover in the so-called rotunda, where they deify so-called Washington, not his real name, but they deify him and show the handover, which actually is the theft of the staff. And there is an actual staff of that is used to rule over. Many different nations had these staff. Some had them using the ankh, so-called ankh. Others had a so-called cold pine needle on the top of the staff. And on this realm, you had a caduceus on it. So each realm had its own symbol. You bring those together or put them in the wrong hands, and you can create chaos. You can manifest chaos.
This is kept outside of the realm, the norm of the realm, meaning the education system.
So yeah,
For a reason.
so it just looks like a cartoon. It looks like Power Rangers or Captain Planet with the rings and all of that. It doesn't. People don't fathom it as real.
Right, or an innocuous symbol left over from the past that people are just using because it looks pretty, or maybe they're paying homage to the past. No, it has nothing to do with that.
So what like if we're talking about religion going down in the next 7 years and a massive shift in other ways in that time frame, is this this is the period, huh? This is the phase, I guess, of the next creation coming, because like it doesn't make, like, I know we've talked about it a bunch of times. Like, you're like, these people in Indochina, they shouldn't be there. These people in the so-called Philippines, these people Latin America, everybody's in places where they shouldn't be. The only thing that can get them out of there is to reset, I would think. For the most part, you might have some, like a handful of people that be like, all right, I respect life. But for the most part, you have like people are like dug into the ignorance. So like, only thing I can think that would uproot it would be some sort of massive calamity.
Mm-hmm. And even then, you see how arrogant people are. Arrogant. Look at the arrogance of, for example, Malibu or Miami. People rebuild right back where the hurricane just wiped away everything. Put it right back, or an earthquake and erosion brought down the houses. You just go right back and build again. That's arrogance. In the face of something that says, okay, well, use respect and basic sense that says, don't put anything back there again. Respect that. They don't obviously respect.
So yeah, we're at that phase where it has to be a total purge. Like, the whole system is just throwing up, and because I just don't see how that you would get people to repatriate and all the lines on the map. Yeah.
This empire hasn't run its course. You have a few more, 100 years before it actually runs its course. But in the meantime, you're going to see a lot of kill-offs, die-offs, etc. in the process. Humbleness is no admittance to your participation or complicity in the crime. Obviously, so you start to claim the place that you stand on as your own, negating everything that came before you. So that goes with the two. What does happen is within an empire, it has to start drawing in. If you look at a toroidal field, in order to maintain itself when it is under attack from where they came from, or they've been gone so long from where they came from, that they know that they don't want to go back, or they enjoy being part of the crime. And that's why these control systems get more tighter, if you will, and people will just go ahead with it. Use the image of going into a subway in Tokyo at rush hour, so you don't have to walk, you stand there. You may not even want to go in that direction, but you will be on that train. You don't even have to move. That's how the crowd moves. And this is what's happening with these what you call breaches of privacy or invasions of privacy or control of travel. You're already seeing and witnessing the limitations of travel. You won't enjoy your travel now because it won't be the same. And the tests that came before with so-called vaccines, now it will get even worse. It will be ramped up, so you won't be able to get to certain places. Some places they will charge you to come into their country, or you have to have proof of certain types of income before they let you in. And in addition to your paperwork. So if you don't have pay stubs or something that shows you have at least this amount in the bank, like getting on a ride at an amusement park, you've got to be that high in order to get on this ride. This is it has nothing to do with protecting so-called native people or protecting their economy. It has everything to do with that which is scripted in this empire in order to maintain the empire. So it limits the travel, which goes with being sentient. Your purpose, not just your right, but your purpose to travel. Whether you are bond, so-called bonded, ancestor of slave or descendant of slave or free, you all have the right and the obligation, if you will,
to travel, to move about. But you can't do that if you allow an empire to put restrictions on that, and people will allow it. That's the danger of group behavior. And if you notice, group behavior has nothing to do with your so-called race. Everyone just gets along and does it. And it's the reason for these experiments of colonies. America's just an so-called America or U.S. is a big experiment for these empires people. And they deliberately put diversity because there's power in diversity in the sense of power for the empire, not for the people.
Yeah. And so if everybody was to repatriate to their respective places on Earth, it would probably be tough at first, but then I guess people would eventually start to thrive.
Yeah, they would. They would, and you would start to reconcile with those who are literally your kin.
And then it would not be any real room for parasitism. Everything would have to go into symbiosis, because then it's like full disclosure at that point, and you kind of like everybody. It's like you're in your own house at that point. It's like, if you make a mess, you gotta clean this up. It won't be, oh, I'm in somebody else's house right now, so I make a mess, I could leave or whatever. It would be way more accountability if everybody was in their own respective places. And then, yeah, so then the parasites, if they existed, I guess they will always exist to some degree, but they would be in such small number that it would be just kind of like, I don't know, any type of garbage disposal system.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what happened when you had the breakdown and the overrun of the empire, the changing of the guard. Many of the so-called whites who were in the subclasses especially, they fought against their black masters and then only to end up right in the hands of the white so-called masters.
Which was probably worse.
Probably even worse.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, as far as me on a personal level, like, I don't really have access, as far as like the parasitic family members that had access to land and resources and stuff like that. Like, if I was to be able to get the things that the Bud family owns, like land or whatever, if I was able to get that, and then I was able to repurpose that land to be a place for Aboriginals and people that are self-aware and growing to be like a place to exist and to expand, then that'd be awesome. But it's like, I don't have that access to that land. Only thing I got really access to is just like knowledge, the knowledge that I do have and that I guess I could get. And
well, there are ways to get it, especially if that is truly your purpose. And be careful with voicing your purpose because parasites listen, obviously. But if that's your purpose, people don't have to repatriate in that sense, but they have to let go of that crap that is maintaining the hegemony, that will bring it down. But you also start to recognize other factors that have been missed and lost at the communal and also the autonomous level that you give up on to support this false realm. Being in a community is being
well, you cut out. Oh, damn. I needed that.
Pardon me. That's not you. That's the screen. It only lasts for 10 minutes, and as I already know that. I'll be more mindful of it. But quickly, as I was saying that, how many are ready to give up not only the parasites that are the ones in the gut and the brain, etc., around the vessel, but also the parasites that come with the ideology, the affiliations, the allegiances. How many are ready to do that? No. They're more willing to give up a tapeworm than they are to give up those ideologies because they hold on to them, they trust in them, they love them, they believe in them, they want to maintain it. It has a connection, a sentimental connection to those who came before you. Not recognizing, as I said before, once you get out of this realm, that whole other realm is a totally different story. You got people who will cut your throat just to get back here, and that could be your grandmother. So much for your ancestral realm. I'm talking about the so-called, what they call the spiritual realm, the so-called realm of the unrest, the so-called you know the word they use, undead. They're not zombies. That's the stuff they want to put into your head. That's not what a zombie is. A zombie is under the control of a witch, and it might be brain dead in the sense of, or physical dead. Many cases in not just Haiti, but primarily in places like Barbados, where people were actually buried for months, if not longer, for years, and they couldn't explain how these people were buried, and they would get up and wander around town, do something for a particular, they didn't know who they were doing this for. They could harm someone, they could do something, scare someone, and then they go right back into that grave again. All done through chemistry, or in this case, so-called herbs, which is chemistry, in order to manifest a state of being that is like being dead. No very faint pulse rate, just keeping you in a minimal metabolic level so that all of the various functions can occur. And they didn't even eat, and they didn't waste away either. Some of them just ate this brew or drank this brew, which is a combination of certain types of leaves, kind of an ayahuasca type situation. And they would go into the grave. Many of the graves are above ground. They're not up to get that picture out of your head. So they're either tombs or mausoleums, and they would go right back into their casket and lay there like a so-called vampire. They wouldn't drink blood, but they would do the bidding of that who had control over them. Or they could be traded out and enslaved. But there was always one who had them under control that could be, and depending on the practice, it could be a so-called, I won't use the terms because I don't want to get anyone in trouble, but you've heard the terms, those who know. They have many different names. Spanish, you might hear the term bruja, or brujo. And in other terms, they have another so-called languages, patois, they have different names as well. But these were the controllers, and you could, if you wanted to, if you were the family member, you could pay to get them out of there. Isn't that not like purgatory, which is what people would pay to get their relatives out of purgatory? Tithing. So all these things are breaking down. They should have been broken down long ago, but because of complacency, fear of questioning, and holding on, as I mentioned before, to these allegiances, these affiliations, and not questioning them. What are you gaining from being black? What are you gaining from being white, so-called white, when you're not? You're just spreading toxins through spreading parasites, and you're spreading it to children. You get these, and it's not about benefits and privilege, as I said before. You have to participate in this madness. So when someone says white privilege, they're using subterfuge. There's no such thing. There's white participation. So you are participating in this madness deliberately because of what you get from it, which is a connection to a group, a team, a so-called winning team, and any of the so-called perks that go with it. And as you see today, the perks are less and less and less and less and less. They're still there in order to maintain the separation and the hegemonic power structure, true power. I don't mean like the ideological power. I mean actual physical power, like electrical power. So to maintain that, you have to maintain that in the mind, so-called minds of those who practice it. The same thing goes with the so-called black. You'll never come out of subjugation if you maintain the blackness.
Yeah.
You have all these signs telling you, stop calling yourself that. There was a movie, I didn't watch the movie, I don't know anything about it, but I saw it on one of the social media ad, and it was called Black Demon. That in itself should make someone who calls themselves black stop calling yourself black. Literally, you don't get it. You're under a spell.
Yeah, I mean,
And most of it is self-imposed. Come out of that. If you want to stop being victimized, stop being the victim by working together and coming out of that and maintaining your strength within your group, it's going to take a lot of work to do so because nothing in this hegemony is going to give you anything. Hegemonies don't work like that. You don't give the people of the house anything if you're in their house.
so if I was to do everything, like, because I remember you were saying, like, that I'm more like a residual creation that's there to help clean up all the clutter. And I was like, man, so if I'm really only employed when I guess things reach a certain deficit or a certain level of decay. Like I'm a creature like me it comes into existence to assist, or sometimes I guess they just continue on with the destruction. But like for me, if I was to live everything to the max, like if I was to carry out the rest of my life in the most holistic way, beneficial to all of life way, what would happen? Would I just continue to loop back in this scenario when things are in decay? But maybe it would be like the football would get moved a little bit further down the field, like where it's in decay, but it's not as bad. Maybe it's a little bit more like because everything would have a purpose. So like if I'm this creature, like only way I would come through is if this purpose is necessary, and the only way it would be necessary is if things are in a certain decay. So like I would imagine it's the same for everybody in the sense that if they're not autochthonous, then it's like the parasites only coming in to clean up the mess. It's like maggots coming in to convert this fertilizer or to convert this what do you want to call it? What do you call it? Compost into fertilizer. And so like if there's no more compost left, or there's only, I guess a necessary amount, then you don't need all these worms. You don't need all these parasites no more because you're not creating this excess waste that needs to be converted for the next stage of creation, like you said, like the sixth or seventh creation, whatever will be after this epic or whatever. So like if I just make myself more obsolete by like assisting in this overall collective process of self-realization and growth, what does that entail for creatures like me? Like what is the next phase? And if we were to make ourselves obsolete, why would we come back?
That's a lot to answer.
Yeah.
You're not obsolete when you recognize that those that brought you through here did not do their math, as those so-called 5%ers might say, but did so without regard, which a lot of are doing. They're not considering that when you bring a life form, you can't just bring a life form. Everything has to be correct and worthy. Therefore, you recognize that you're not going to continue those patterns that they did, and then you become necessary. You're not obsolete. You don't do what they do or what they did. You don't further what your ancestry did because you see it's just doing the same thing. You mentioned before about land, and if you were to get that land, what you would do with that land. You could bring in those who had to prove themselves worthy, and on not just one time, on an ongoing basis, because you're doing the same thing. Through study, through putting your effort into learning about everything around you, from the land to one another, not for the purpose of just because of what's to come. That's the danger of so-called religion. They want to tell you, okay, here and now means nothing, and after is everything. That is another reason why religion evolved. Here and now is here and now. You don't forgo it, you don't disrespect it. No differently than the way they would teach, I don't know about any other religion, but I know that from what I have read and what I have seen with people I counsel, many Catholics did not exercise because they were told that this was the sin of the flesh. So you don't exercise because that's vanity and it's flesh. Therefore, the only thing that matters is your spirit. You kind of see this in other religions too, in different forms, different ways and practices. But it's the same thing. You can call it a slave mindset. Allegedly, the so-called black slave. I'm using that deliberately because slave is not synonymous with so-called black. All misnomers, all confused. But in any case, it was taught to them in indoctrination and song, in the sweet by and by, which means after you go, and other formats where you'll get your piece of pie in the sky when you fill in the blank. In other words, everything here and now you do for what? You do for the glory and honor of God? Depends on who is God. So in the hegemony, the God would look like a melanin devoid recessive. And so that would be your God. And all that they did was for their glory and honor. And if you wanted out of that, you had to wait to your demise, and then you go to black heaven. You couldn't come to the white heaven. It just doesn't work. This is what was taught, and to this day it's probably still thought of by many, the Catholic Baptist version. Yes, as I said earlier, Christianity is Catholicism. They try to separate that. More confusion. They're all the same. Literally. Some just have less bling in their worship places. Some have a lot of bling, some don't. But they're all the same. And therefore, these religions should not be part of the mindset or the framework of those that are part of the community that you construct. And so as a founder of it, you're laying the groundwork for that which is now and that which is to come, physically and otherwise, experimentally and soul-wise, by what you set forth now.
So
People would have to leave their whiteness at the door and keep it out there and get rid of it. It's not coming in there. The same thing with blackness and any other type of jingoistic viewpoint. I'm Latino, I'm Asian, I'm Italian. That stuff's got to go. Because more than likely you're not that, and have you taken it upon yourself. So this could be a place of learning and discovery, for true discovery, and getting rid of all those things that have bound people to false connection. And speaking of Latino, if people just did the math, they find out that word did not exist. It was brought about in the 70s and 80s, primarily pushed by the likes of people like Ronald Reagan. Same thing with so-called African American. That was pushed by people like Jesse Jackson, who, by the way, if you study his background, he's that type that I was talking about. He looks like on the surface, but he's not. And you see the look and the connection and the bloodline comes forth in the behavior. He lived and breathed for the purpose of, he's still breathing, for the purpose of confusing, confounding, and misguiding abolition.
Yeah, I guess Jesse Jackson was cool with the system until he until he called New York Town. They let him do it with anything he had a free run until he started talking about the tiny hat people.
Anytime there's controversy, you have to look at it like this. Controversy in so-called media, that's all staged to some degree. It's all staged. There's controlled opposition. So I just look at it like what it is. It's entertainment. They want you to get distracted by it. If you're going to get it to either side or pick a side, then that's the purpose. They want you to pick a side. And they, meaning those who control the media and their participants. It's no different than, I won't mention the names that who are recent celebrity, so-called rapper, producer, clothing designer. That's all distraction because I guarantee you that's scripted.
Yeah, no, I mean it's definitely a stage, and stage is an anagram for gate. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to know, I guess, as far as like what my place would be in